Hi there. Thanks for joining me for this probably my most important live stream to date. This is essentially a part two. If you've seen my last live stream from a few days ago, we looked at the I'll pull up the official name, the gang rape report from Britain, and I went through it rather meticulously because I did read it, and it's scandalous. If you saw the stream or if you've read the report, it's been around, and I'm glad it has been around. And I could only basically get to a certain point, and I had to stop due to time. I think we went on for 3 hours. So now we are going to continue with part two, which is I actually ended it at a very opportune and logical point, which is now we're going to look at the actual ideology and the religion, Islam, that drives this. And maybe it doesn't. We'll see. We're gonna look at all the different variables. This is gonna probably be long, and I have so many notes and so many things you probably haven't heard of, even if you've read this report, because this particular topic, this grooming, rape gangs in England in particular, but in Europe in general, I've actually been following this, and I've written a lot about it for probably 15 years. Was my first article. So I went back and got a lot of that information. And the more you look back at that old information, the more things that are happening today and that are being exposed by this report make sense, rather disturbing sense, actually. So, I'm going to summarize real quick what we went over in the first episode, the first stream, which is basically the report itself and what's going on. But actually, let me make sure I'm actually, am I on? I always worry that I'm talking to myself again. Anyway, okay, good. Sounds like we are in order. All right. So to summarize very briefly, the report and the topics that I discussed in the last stream. The report, it was an independent inquiry that was chaired by Rupert Lowe, MP of Restore Britain, and it was crowd-funded. The government, as we'll see, went out of its way to actually suppress this sort of inquiry, and they raised, I think, something like £800,000 from over 20,000 public donors. Good for them. And what it did is the report examined the systematic grooming and sexual exploitation of vulnerable girls, overwhelmingly white British. I'm reading it now, by predominantly Muslim Pakistani gangs across the UK, and it's widely now being described as, quote, one of the worst scandals in British history, probably the worst, actually. It welcomed testimony from all backgrounds, from all sorts of witnesses, including decades later, people who were abused. Some became doctors, medical doctors, psychiatrists, psychologists, and were even put in a better position to opine about what happened to them and others. And I'll get to that as well. And now, what's good about this particular report is that it examined all the aspects without restrictions on any politically sensitive topics. Because hitherto, the British government, if it were to even do something like that, it would not in any way, shape, or form want to give data about the race of the people behind this or the religion. Okay. They would hide that as, how dare you? Well, how dare you ask these kinds of questions, as if to imply that, someone's race or religion or philosophy or ideology or culture in any way, shape, or form informs their actions, right? And because of that, this report was established due to decades of institutional failure. And if you read the report, it's just disgusting. Failure by the police, by the social services, by the schools, by NHS, by licensing authorities, governments, of course, and all due to things like political correctness and fear of being called racist. Okay. And if you want to get an idea, because now that I've done more research and I've been looking at this, even though and I've been looking at this, so this last point, what's interesting is now that this report is out and we are all benefiting from it. I'm glad it came out. I'm glad it was done. This is something every Brit should read for certain. And every person, every Western person who's living, who has Muslim minorities around them, or you should be aware of this too. Not for hate or xenophobia, but for knowledge. Knowledge is good, okay? To know what's what. And for the longest time, when people said the things that are now being completely documented and are all demonstrable and are well known, it's now they got to deal with it. When they said that years ago, they were so attacked as being racists, because that's the word that has conditioned British people, Westerners in general, to just fall down. If someone yells the word racist, they can't do anything and they get paralyzed. And so, for example, I was looking and I came across this particular anecdote that I had written about many years ago. Sarah Champion, an MP for Rotherham, which was the epicenter of this whole scandal, the absolute worst one. It's the one that sort of, catapulted this topic to national, if not international, attention. But at the time, and now we know what happened. Okay, I think it's something like 1,400 girls in this small area that were systematically groomed and raped, etc. At the time when she was calling for this, she was attacked in all kinds of horrific ways. She was accused of, quote, fanning the flames of racial hatred and, quote, acting like a neo-fascist murderer. And again, what was her crime? Well, she dared to assert that, quote, now here are her words: Britain has a problem with British Pakistani men raping and exploiting white girls. Yeah, blunt and to the point, and now exonerated and actually true. But because she had said that, so think of how many girls had to suffer from the time that she said that and was attacked, and labeled a racist and a fascist. And because of that, this issue was not addressed the way it's being addressed, at least now, meaning more girls suffered and more Muslims and Pakistanis did what they did with impunity. All right. I really hope now that this report is out, all these people, and most of them are actually in the government, high up, okay, that, and in the media, and they're all authorities, okay? I hope all these people, now that this report is out, who years ago, when echoes of this were coming out, they were the first ones to attack it and say, oh, you're a racist, oh, you're an Islamophobe, and would ruin you. I hope they all are remembered and are brought forth to some sort of reckoning, okay? It should not be left like that, because of their inactivity and shutting down this real thing, many more people suffered. Many more young girls actually had to suffer. Okay, so that's why I'm saying this thing was crowdfunded and good for them and Rupert Lowe for putting it all together, because the government did everything actually to suppress this, and those who were talking about it when it was already documented but not as widespread and known as it is now were completely demonized for even daring to say this, and had their careers destroyed. So that's a good thing to know. So to summarize again the findings of this report very quick, which I covered in great detail in the first live stream, the crimes date back to the 1950s. Okay, so over 70 years. I think I remember I read it. It was something like 1950 something 4 or something. Anyway, where a Pakistani gang groomed something like a 13 or 14-year-old British girl. And so it's been going on since the 50s, and it's been escalating with mass migration. So the more the migrants from the Muslim countries grow, the more this phenomenon has grown with them, which is, of course, normal. I've talked about this all the time. I've even given it a name. Something like 12 years ago, I dubbed it Islam's rule of numbers. And I did it in the context of Britain as well. I was talking about recently in Belfast, they or a Muslim man tried to decapitate an Irishman in Belfast. And as shocking as that may be, well, something over 10 years earlier, another Muslim, also African, they're both Africans, these two Muslim perpetrators, did kill Rigby. I'm forgetting his first name, a British soldier, killed him and decapitated his head in broad daylight in London and walked around with it. All right. So, yeah, these things, that's why I call it the Islam's rule of numbers, because as Muslims grow, well, the stuff that happens in the Islamic world to non-Muslims comes to your countries in the West. So that was the perfect case. Now, what are the tactics that we found in the report? Well, these Muslims, adults, sometimes very old, they groom these very young girls, often from broken homes. They groom them by giving them gifts, drugs, alcohol, and these girls that they target, I guess they have them from the age of 11 in the report. They have many that are that young. And they take them to rape houses, hotels, they traffic them, they torture them, they film them, they blackmail them. And sometimes there's forced conversions, there's pregnancies and abortions, trafficking outside of Britain as well. They become basically sex slaves. And as you'll see, this particular live stream is dedicated to examining that particular doctrinal and historical phenomena that has plagued the world thanks to Islam. And some of these, I'm looking again at the notes from what I spoke about and from the report. They had what was called red rooms, where extreme and sadistic and humiliating forms of violence took place. And I'm going to have a lot to say about that too, because there's a lot of historical continuity here that most people would never have guessed. The number of victims of these young white British girls is supposed to be a minimum of 250,000, 250,000. But most experts believe it's a lot more, as I do, because usually in these sorts of sensitive things, nobody wants to share numbers, and everything's suppressed and just conflated, so you can't get racial data and that sort of thing. But according to the report, it was at least 250,000. And again, they faced repeated abuse, often daily, suffered lifelong trauma, et cetera, et cetera. Now, the perpetrators, their profile, this is very interesting. We're really going to, because it's a little more complicated than you may think. Of course, it's overwhelmingly men. The report says from Muslim backgrounds, 87 to 95% of those who were convicted doing this had Muslim names. Okay. But the report also makes it a point to say that the overwhelming majority of them were of Pakistani heritage. The report does says it says this Pakistani heritage, and it also says this is actually a quote, with smaller involvement from Somali, Iranian, Syrian, Turkish groups, all of which, of course, are Muslims. So, according to the report, it's a Muslim phenomena. Essentially, it is, of course, overwhelmingly Pakistani, but you have these other Muslim groups. And we will I will now very specifically address this particular point, because it's interesting. Is this really a Pakistani cultural thing, and other fellow Muslims are joining them in, because it's so easy and available, or is it an Islamic thing? And this is an important question. We don't want to demonize all the Pakistanis, even though 99% of them are Muslim. But anyway, and then of course the report made clear that there were disgusting and unprecedented institutional and political failures. As I already mentioned, the police, social services, NHS, schools, licensing bodies not only ignored the evidence, but sometimes were, complicit one way or the other, sometimes actively with the rapists. As I discussed, I told you there was a story about these girls who were, abandoned and or sought asylum in these homes. And then a Pakistani taxi driver would come honk the horn, and the workers would take these girls and give it to him. So he give the girls to him so he can drive them to the rape house where a bunch of men were waiting. Really disgusting stuff. There's a cat right here troubling me. And then there's the London phenomena. So in many ways, London is among the absolute worst. Well, why? Well, it has the highest concentration of Muslims, to the point that its mayor, Sadiq Khan, is, of course, not just a Muslim, but a Pakistani. And it's really disgusting if you go online. Again, now that this is being solidified and, becoming an unquestioned reality, if you look at the documentation, if you go back months and years and watch videos of this mayor Sadiq Khan, he was questioned about it numerously. And all he did is just completely evade the questions, straw man tactics, accuse the questioners of being racist and Islamophobes, xenophobes, that sort of thing. Okay, which is really disgusting when you think about it, because I thought he's a I thought he's the mayor of London, which is in Britain, capital. Shouldn't he care about the welfare of the British people, especially the people of London? Well, he kind of was acting rather tribalish now and clannish. And I have to say this now. This is an interesting point that I often think about. All right, you know the old saying, right? If it walks like a duck and acts like a duck and quacks like a duck, maybe it's a duck. For some reason, I find Western people are really terrified of this sort of axiom, which is what we have at work here. Okay. So now we've known for decades that Pakistanis, Muslims, are grooming girls in the UK and Britain, et cetera, et cetera. People had wind of this for, we're talking about it. I'm here in the United States. Okay. And it's become big news. And it was big news a long time ago. But you can rest assured, when something's big news now for someone as far as I am, it was huge back then, which is to say people knew it, but it was being suppressed and covered up. Okay. Everyone knew the rumor is out. Pakistanis, these Muslims are doing bad things to little girls. Keep your girl away from them, et cetera, et cetera. And then, wow, in London, you have a mayor who happens to be a Pakistani Muslim. All right. Who just led a great, provocative supremacist style prayer, Trafalgar Square. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right. Recently, okay. And well, what did he do when he was asked? Well, he said, "No, this is all lies. It's false. You're an Islamophobe." And I think a lot of people believed it. Okay, but did it ever occur to those people that, you know what, maybe as a Pakistani Muslim, this guy, for one reason or another, is involved in this, tribalism, which is especially rife amongst Muslims and Pakistanis, and not even involved like he's actively involved. I'm not even saying that, but it's a matter of honor. It's my people. I feel some sort of loyalty to them, and we're going to get into this, the doctrine of loyalty and enmity, al-wala wal-bara, which definitely impacts everything we're talking about, particularly Sadiq Khan. Did it ever occur to anyone that that might be going on? It's the exact opposite. I think people are now in this sort of there's this cultural climate where the most obvious thing, which is now called a stereotype, if you say it, if you think it, you're a horrible person. Okay, so the very idea that a man who is Pakistani and Muslim is somehow, who's also the mayor of London, is somehow or other covering up for these guys and being tribal, it's so in your mind, such a racist thing to even think, that you can't think it. And so you immediately block it out of your mind. This is the same phenomena as when you go to the airport security and everyone's checking out the old white lady, not the Muslim guy or the black guy or the big, or me. Okay. Because they want to make it clear to you, we don't think this way. Could be anyone. That's stereotypical. I'm not going to stereotype you. But anyway, now I think it's clear when you think about it what Mr. Sadiq Khan was really doing, which at best he was covering up for what he sees as his people, which are not Londoners or Britain or English people. It's Pakistanis, of course, and he was covering up for them. That's at best. At worst, well, let your mind, your imagination go wild on that. Now we come to the very important questions. All right. So that's the background I've given you about the report, the findings, the significance, a little bit of the history, the dissembling that went on before it came out. Now let's get into the important questions. Why? Is this a Muslim thing? Is this a Pakistani thing? Is this a cultural thing? Is this an Asian thing? What is this? If you look at the report, and a lot of people I think do believe this, there's a feeling that this is kind of, it's both. It's a little bit of Islam, but it's kind of a Pakistani thing primarily. All right. I'm not saying that's exactly what the report is saying, but the data it shares leads to that kind of conclusion. And So the idea is, okay, it's a little bit of both, because the report does point out that it's primarily, overwhelmingly Pakistanis, and then it also says it's also Muslims, smaller Muslim minority groups. Okay, so what's the connection? Why are the Pakistanis in the lead? Surely this is maybe a Pakistani thing, not something we necessarily want to throw onto all Muslims, and those other Muslims are somehow or other got connected to it. Aha. I will offer to you two proofs that will make it abundantly, if not unequivocally clear, that this is not a Pakistani thing, this is a Muslim thing. Okay. Proof number one. Well, demographics and the population of Muslims in Britain. You may not know this. Of course, if you're British, you know this better than I do. But if you take all the Muslims in England, in Britain, the UK, okay, um, okay, 38% of them are Pakistanis. 15% are Bangladeshi, and 7% are Indian. Added together, that is like 60+%. Okay. And, in most British people's minds, Bangladeshi, Indian, Pakistani Muslims are one people. No offense to those particular groups. I'm not trying to conflate you like that. I know you have your nuanced differences ethnically and whatnot, linguistically as well. But, from a British point of view, when they look at it, Bangladeshi, Indian, or Pakistani, if you're a Muslim from those countries, they just say you're a Pakistani. You're seen as that. So if that's the case, then you would expect, if Muslims are raping and involved in this, you would expect, of course, that the majority of the Muslims would be Pakistanis. Why? Because Pakistanis are the majority per se. Logical, isn't it? Now, and other than Pakistani, Bangladeshi, and Indian, Afghanis and Turks, those are again amongst the other sort of British Muslim population. It's only like 6%. Black, as in African Muslims, are only 10%, and Arabs are about 7%. So it makes perfect sense that, of course, the overwhelming majority of the Muslims who will be engaged in this behavior, in this gang rape business, will be Pakistani, Bangladeshi, Indian Muslims, because they have the lion's share of the population, of the Muslim population. Okay, so that's only logical. That's to be expected. Now, the second proof, very similarly, is that, well, this problem, as bad as it is in the UK, it's actually manifesting itself in, well, we'll get to that, but all around the world where Muslims are. But just let's look at Europe, Western Europe specifically, and see what are the similar parallels. So in Germany, do you okay? Again, no, what we're talking about in Britain, for whatever reason, has not happened or metastasized to that point in any other Western European nation. This, systematic grooming and exploitation and treating British girls like slaves, 250,000 of them. I mean, I haven't heard about that happening in other European countries, but you have things that are leading up to that and are very similar. So take Germany. Do you remember in the New Year's Eve in Cologne in 2016, the big story, which was, you can look it up, of course, if it hasn't been memory hold and kind of hidden in the media, but I'm sure a lot of you remember what I'm talking about. But there was this mass, something about 1,000 German women were sexually groped, sexually harassed. I think some were raped, and overwhelmingly by Muslim migrants in Germany. Okay. And in Austria, which, like Germany, is very similar, of course. You both Germany and Austria. The Cologne example is just one of the most memorable. But both in Germany and Austria, you have the same sorts of stories: Muslims engaged in rape, getting girls drunk, raping them, sometimes killing them. In these stories, and in one of them in Austria, I was reminded as I was going through my notes. Here's a very interesting one. It's kind of telling of everything, but it's a 20-year-old Austrian woman was waiting at a bus stop in Vienna. And by the way, Vienna, maybe you've seen my interview with Ralph Scholhammer, who's from Vienna. He's Austrian. Is kind of like an Islamic city now. They have more Muslim students in their schools than they do have native Austrians. But anyway, She was waiting at a bus stop in Vienna, and she was sexually harassed, beat, and robbed by four, as the report goes on to explain, Arabic-looking men, including one who, quote, started by putting his hands through my hair and who made it clear that in his cultural background, there were hardly any blonde women. Okay. And then police responded by telling her to dye her hair. That's what she should do from now on. Here's the quote from that report. At first, I was scared, but now I'm more angry than anything. After the attack, they told me that women shouldn't be alone on the streets after 8 p.m. And they also gave me other advice, telling me I should dye my hair dark and also not dress in such a provocative way. Indirectly, that means I was partly to blame for what happened to me. This is a massive insult. Well, I mean, hopefully the women in Western Europe have gotten used to that, because ever since that, I've come across numerous reports that are of the same sort of sentiments and the same experiences. I've heard somewhere in Sweden, women are often told to dye their hair dark to ward off Muslims, and well, I'll tell you a little bit about Sweden momentarily. Now, if you look at Germany and Austria, okay, the older half of the Muslim population, the older one, the original one that's been there for decades, is Turkish. But the newcomers who are actually responsible for what we're talking about, including at this Cologne, New Year things, are overwhelmingly not Pakistani, but Arab. Okay. The Syrians are about 40 to 50% in Germany. Afghans are about 10 to 20%. Iraqis, also Arabic, are significant, though not as much as the Syrians. And then there's others from Egypt, Morocco, North Africa, smaller minorities. So, in other words, here's a perfect example that in Germany, where you have the same sorts of things happening, okay, it's not Pakistanis, it's other Muslims, Arabs in this case. And now let's get to what I just mentioned, Sweden, which is its own special case. Let me read to you from a very important article, and you should look it up if you can. It's on Gatestone Institute. It came out a long time ago. Let me see. Anyway, you can look it up. The title is Sweden, Rape Capital of the West. Okay, and then let me read to you just one quote from it. Here's a quote. 40 years after the Swedish parliament unanimously decided to change the formerly homogenous Sweden into a multicultural country, violent crime has increased by 300% and rapes by 1,472%. The overwhelming majority of rapists are Muslim immigrants. The epidemic is so bad that some blonde Scandinavian women are dyeing their hair black in the hopes of warding off potential Muslim predators. And that's what I was telling you. I was thinking of this particular excerpt and quote. Okay. Now, well, what's Sweden? Because, and this is well known too. What's going on in Sweden? Is this Pakistanis? Well, no, actually, if you look at all the Muslims in Sweden, about between 30 and 35% are Arab, Syrian, Iraqi. 15 to 25% are Afghani, Iranian. About 15% are African and Somali. And then you have a smaller amount of Turks. Again, they're probably there longer, and other very tiny amounts that are rather insignificant. So the overwhelming majority are Arabs. And then second to that is Afghans and Iranians. And then third is Somalis and Africans. No Pakistanis there. So you're seeing the same phenomenon, the same dynamics, the same pattern. And it's not Pakistanis. It's actually just Muslims, because there aren't even any. I mean, I'm sure there's Pakistanis in Sweden, but their numbers, if you look it up, are really insignificant. Not even being mentioned in the data I looked up. Okay, and then you see this stuff goes back, and people don't remember this because these stories intentionally get suppressed. In Australia, you ever hear of the Scaff Gang rapes, as they were known? Also known as the Sydney Gang rapes. These were a series of brutal, coordinated gang rapes committed in Sydney, also in New South Wales, in Australia, and mostly around August and September of 2000. Now, here are some of the key facts. The perpetrators, the rapists, were a group of young, mostly Lebanese background Australian citizens. I don't know if they were citizens, they were young. I don't know if they were born there or they immigrated, but they're in the reports I looked at, they're defined as Lebanese Australians. Okay. And the gang was led by two brothers, Muhammad and Bilal Scaff. That's why it's known as the Scaff rapes. The victims, it says at least 6 Australian women and teenage girls as young as 14 were lured from public spaces like shopping centers, train stations, or parks under pretext such as offers of free marijuana and alcohol, then taken to isolated spots, parks, toilets, etc., and subjected to prolonged, degrading gang rapes, sometimes lasting hours, often involving 10 plus assailants on each woman individually, with others watching, laughing, and cheering. The nature of the crimes, the attacks were described by the sentencing judge, District Court Judge Michael Finane, as, quote, worse than murder. Why? Due to their sadistic, humiliating, and planned nature. There were ethnic, racial overtones reported in court and media, with victims describing slurs and the attackers speaking their own language while laughing and mocking them. Okay. So I'm only laughing because this excerpt I'm reading to you doesn't mention religion. It's an older excerpt, and so kudos to the UK report because they're actually finally bringing in religion as well. Okay. There's so many. So I'm giving you examples here of the same dynamics, the same phenomena happening in other countries to European women, okay, by Muslims, and none of these are actually Pakistanis. So you're seeing the same dynamics. So this is the point being, this is less a Pakistani cultural thing, more of an Islamic thing. And I will give you more and more abundant evidence to actually validate this. And there's so many more. You know, here's I guess this is you can call this a very anecdotal one, but 4 Muslim migrants from North Africa, Berbers, gang raped a 36-year-old woman on the Spanish island of Gran Canaria, after she stopped to ask how she could help them. Okay, so these were Africans, North Africans, I assume Moroccans, Algerians, maybe, who illegally entered on this Spanish island. And she, probably being a bleeding heart liberal, wanted to help them. So she approached them and asked how to help. Now, here's an actual quote from the report. The alleged victim is believed to have lived on the Canary Islands, but she wasn't Spanish. She's described as Irish. Whereas the suspects arrived only recently on a boat. They were given initially government-provided accommodations managed by the Red Cross, but later kicked out for breaking the rules and then let free to roam around. They are then thought to have set up camp in the park where the woman was allegedly attacked after inquiring about their situation. The woman had asked if she could help them with anything, but within a matter of seconds, this had led to her being assaulted and raped. Okay. So, okay, how about this one? Do you remember a long time ago in Egypt? You ever hear the word taharrush? The taharrush gangs? This is the idea, and you would see it often, of women would go out in Egypt, even if they're dressed fine, and men would sexually harass them, grab them, do things to them, okay? And up to, as we will see, rape them, all right? So this is now Egypt. This isn't Pakistan. And there's one report. I was going to pull it up, actually. Let's see if I can do it right now. Yeah, take a look at this. See that? Daily News. 99.3% of Egyptian women experienced sexual harassment. All right. What do you make of that? 99%. Basically, if you're an Egyptian woman and you live in Egypt, you have to be sexually harassed, is what that means. Okay. And so here's some more statistics. A study by the Egyptian Center for Women's Rights said that 62% of Egyptian men admitted to harassing women, while 53% blamed them for bringing it on. Okay. So all these men admitted, yeah, I harassed women, but then they said, yeah, they deserve it. They brought it on. All right. Um, Now here, let me read to you some quotes. Okay, so after describe, okay, here's Sarah A. Topol. I don't know if so. This the horror thing, if you remember, was during the Arab Spring and the revolutions, and Western Europeans would go there, reporters, thinking it's just a normal country. Women would go there, and blonde-haired women would go there, thinking they just can walk in the streets, and then they found out that well, it's they can't for some reason. So Sarah A. Topol said that, quote, sexual harassment, actually, let's call it what it is, assault in Egypt is not just common, it's an epidemic. It inhabits every space in the society, from back alleys to the birthplace of the newest chapter of Egyptian history. They're talking about like the Arab Spring. This is how old this is. For the 18 days of protest last year, for me, Tahrir Square was a harassment-free zone. I noticed it, everyone did. But as soon as President Hosni Mubarak stepped down, the unity ended and the harassment returned. Here's another one. Journalists Sophia Jones and Erin Banco also wrote about it. And they said, quote, it's difficult to write about sexual harassment and assault in Egypt without sounding like angry white girls. But as journalists, it is not merely our job to report in such an environment. It is an everyday psychological and sometimes even physical battle. We open our closets in the morning and debate what to wear to lessen we open our closets in the morning and debate what to wear to lessen the harassment, as if this would help. Even fully veiled women are harassed on Cairo streets. Well, of course, you just saw 99% of the women. As one young Cairo-based female reporter recently remarked, quote, it's a effed up reality that we will be touched. Like hundreds of other countries around the world, sexual harassment and assault happens every day in Egypt. It happens to both Egyptian women and to foreign women. It happens at all times of the day, despite what some may think, at the hands of men, young boys, grown men, police officers, military officers, and almost everyone in between. Now, here's a final one. Natasha Smith, a young British journalist covering Tahrir Square, was dragged away from her male companion into a frenzied mob in the hundreds. She said, men began to rip off my clothes. They pulled my limbs apart and threw me around. They were scratching and clenching my breasts and forcing their fingers inside me in every possible way. All I could see was leering faces, more and more faces sneering and jeering as I was tossed around like fresh meat among starving lions. Okay, again, I'm sorry I'm laughing, but it's just too much. It's too much that this happens so regularly, so frequently, so many people talk about it. It's documented, and yet we're still in denial. You can't talk about it. Okay, this information. Think of all how many hundreds of thousands of these British girls could have actually been saved had this honest information just been made available and taken seriously decades ago. Okay. And, the jury's still out if this information in this report will do anything. We don't even know. Time will tell. Let's hope it does. Okay. Okay. So this is the background. This is the story. This is what's going on. Now it's time to answer the big questions, as I promised, which is what is, if any, the Islamic connection? I've given you examples. I've shown you it's anecdotal at this point. I've shown you different Muslim groups all involved in the same sorts of behavior, treating women, especially in this case, European, Western women, like pieces of meat, like they said, et cetera, et cetera. And now the question is, well, is this just a coincidence? Is this just third worldism? Is this a cultural thing? Or is this Islam? This is a big question, right? So bear with me, pay attention, and let's do this. All right. So what I'm going to do first is from the report itself. Remember, I told you I stopped at a certain point because it was just too much to go on. The report itself, actually, to its credit, has a whole section about Islam. It's called The Influence of Islam on page 116 is where it starts. And again, to its credit, it actually takes the religion seriously, and it tries to look into it, the doctrines, and see how these doctrines may have applied to and especially exacerbated what's going on in this particular phenomena. All right. So let me read to you. I'm not going to, I just told you the page number. You can look it up. You can read the whole thing to yourself. But I'm going to comment on some of the more, what I consider the more useful parts. So the first section is titled Muslim Supremacism. All right. What does that have to do with mistreating women sexually, et cetera, et cetera? Well, let's see. It says, quote, Islam holds that those who are righteous and truly fear God, Allah, meaning Muslims, are inherently superior to those who reject Allah's commands, namely non-Muslims, infidels, us. This idea is captured in Quran 3:110, which reads as follows, quote, you, Muslims, are the best nation, raised up for humankind, commanding what is good and forbidding what is wrong, and believing in Allah. If only the people of the book, meaning Christians and Jews, believed, it would be better for them. But some among them are believers and most are perverted. Okay. So now think about it. If you're a Muslim in London or any Western nation and you go to mosque and you read your Quran, you're told that these people around you, these Brits, these Europeans, are perverted. All right. And this is among the more mild verses that I'm going to read to you. Here's another one, Surah 48:28. It reads as follows. It is He, Allah, who has sent His messenger, Muhammad, with the guidance and the religion of truth, Islam, to make it triumph over every religion. So Islam is there not to coexist or just something that Muslims do on their own. Just don't, leave us alone, give us freedom. It's there to triumph over others. Interesting, isn't it? It's there to triumph over every other religion. And that is precisely what Islam's notorious war cry, Allahu Akbar, encapsulates. Allahu Akbar, as I've said for 15 years, it's always translated as God is great, I think intentionally, because it sounds kind of palpable and acceptable to Western ears. If you're a Christian, well, yeah, God's great. It sounds good. No, they're saying it's not a superlative. It's not God. It's not God is great, and it's not a superlative, meaning it's not God is greatest. Sometimes some people do that. It's comparative, which means literally in Arabic, it's saying God, Allah is greater. Greater than what? Well, then, as this verse says, every other religion and the people who follow that religion. So when they scream Allahu Akbar, they're basically telling you my religion's better than you and everything you believe in. That's the logic. Now, here's some more verses. Quran 8:55. Surely the worst of animals in Allah's sight are those who reject Islam. They do not believe. Okay, so if you are a non-Muslim and you reject the dawah, you reject the call of Islam, according to the Quran, you're an animal. All right? You're the worst of animals. And you may be thinking, well, animals are kind of cool. I got no problem with animals. I like my pets. Okay, you have to understand from an Islamic point of view, an animal is like, it's a very, very harsh thing to call a human an animal. And here the Quran is saying, if you're a non-Muslim, you're the worst form of animal. Okay, whatever that means. And then there's so many more. So Surah or Quran 9:28 labels al-mushrikeen, those who associate something with Allah, which primarily is a reference to Christians because they say Christians associate a son, Christ, with Allah, the Trinity. It refers to them in all sorts of pejorative words, such as they're nejas, they're unclean, they're dirty. All right. And obviously, as you can see, these sorts of teachings can provide a religious justification that bolsters an abuser's conviction of their own superiority and facilitates the dehumanization of non-Muslim victims, which, if you looked at the report, that's what it's all about. The Muslims literally treat these British girls like animals, subhumans, the worst things that you can imagine. Well, this is where it comes from, all right? This is just the beginning. We're talking about Muslim supremacism. There's a lot more to get into about Islamic doctrines that will actually shed more light on this. Now, One of the Rotherham, which is the oldest or the earliest, one of the best well-known cases that really first exposed what was happening. I think it was like 1,400 British girls. And one of them, a survivor, went on to become a doctor. Good for her. Dr. Ella Hill. According to the report, she described abusive language and acts that embodied this sense of superiority that I'm telling you about. All right, don't let your blood boil too much, but she recounted being made to bend down and kiss perpetrator's feet as a deliberate act to underscore her inferiority. They made her do that. She also spoke of another Rotherham victim who, during gang rapes by dozens of Muslim men, was forced to lick their feet clean because, quote, they believed they were morally superior to her. Dr. Hill observed, quote, it's a Muslim superiority thing. They believe they have maximum moral authority to command the people beneath them to lick their feet. Gross, man. She further noted that her rapists viewed non-Muslim habits as inherently impure. Yeah, of course. If you're eating pork, you're unclean. You're dirty. If you use a knife and fork, you're dirty. If you don't eat your foods with your hands, you're dirty. This is her talking. Okay, so again, this is all absolutely true. I've been around Muslims, and I know there was one Muslim man I used to deal with. I've mentioned him before. I used to work with him in the Library of Congress, and he tried to pull the moderate game, but I knew better. Okay, and one thing that I always would notice is because he was friendly to me and I was friendly to him, he would never want to shake hands with me. And I would intentionally, when I was kind of annoyed with him, if there was any kind of circumstance, I'm parting from him, I would definitely put my hand out, and he would shake it, but I knew he didn't want to because he'd have to go clean himself and go through kind of some sort of ablutions because I'm a dirty infidel. All right. So yeah, this is a real thing. All right. The next thing the report mentions, as far as Islam, it talks about loyalty and enmity. It even has the Arabic phrase al-wala wal-bara, which is what I have identified many years ago, maybe 20 years ago, because it's in my first book, The Al-Qaeda Reader, which I started working on in 2005. And that book, I have a whole chapter, about 60 pages, about this particular doctrine, al-wala wal-bara, which it can be translated in so many ways. I used to translate it as loyalty and enmity. A lot of Muslims actually today translate it as love and hate, and that really captures the essence. Here they translate it as loyalty and disavowal. Okay. And what is this doctrine? I've spoken about it before. I've identified it as the most divisive doctrine in the Quran, in many ways responsible for everything we're talking about. It's basically tribalism deified. Okay. If tribalism was there before in Arabia in the 7th century, now God wants it. And you go to hell if you're not tribal, and you go to heaven if you are, which means ensuring that tribalism has become ossified amongst Muslims. And there's so many verses. I've given them before. So, for example, Surah Quran 328, quote, let not the believers, Muslims, take the disbelievers as allies rather than believers. Whoever does that has nothing left with Allah, unless you just guard yourselves as a precaution. This is, of course, the verse that primarily exonerates and talks about taqiyya. This is where it comes from. I'm reading to the English translation. Unless you guard yourselves as a precaution. Both those words, guard yourself and a precaution, are built from the root word that we get, taqiyya. And this is the primary verse that justifies. Taqiyya, of course, is where you pretend to be friendly with non-Muslims, even though you hate them, because that's what Islam teaches. This doctrine, loyalty and enmity, love and hate, like I told you, some Muslims translate it. That's what it's all about. It's about, I have to be loyal to fellow Muslims. I have to help them. I have to support them. If I'm Sadiq Khan of London and my fellow Muslims are getting in trouble because they're raping these infidel women, I have to do everything possible to actually shield them from this. Okay, this is loyalty and enmity. Okay, like I told you, ultimate tribalism. Here's another verse, Quran 551 to 52/56. Quote, "You who believe, do not take the Jews and the Christians as allies. They are allies of each other. Whoever of you takes them as allies is already one of them," which means you're an infidel. "Surely Allah does not guide the people who are evildoers," meaning non-Muslims. To be a non-Muslim, you're an evildoer. "Yet you see those in whose hearts is a sickness. They are quick to turn to them. Whoever takes Allah as an ally and his messenger, Muhammad, and those who believe, Muslims, surely the party of Allah, they are the victors." Okay. There is another verse making it very clear that you don't befriend by name. It says, don't befriend Jews and Christians. Okay. And what is the West full of? Well, primarily people who used to be Christians or are Christians, and Muslims still see them as Christians, and of course, minorities of Jews. Okay, so Muslims go there, and their book is telling them by name, don't befriend those people, and rather, as we've seen in other verses, guard yourselves from them, but you can engage in taqiyya and you can act like they're a friend, even though you're not. And then, of course, the number one verse that I've always quoted, Quran 64, and it says, "You have a good example in Abraham, the prophet," or well, they call him the prophet Ibrahim, the Muslims. This would be the patriarch Abraham, but in the Quranic rendering, he does something a little different, as you'll see. The verse continues, "And those who were with him, for they said to their people, surely we are done of you and what you serve instead of Allah," meaning you people are pagans, we're done with that. We repudiate you, and between us and you enmity has appeared and hatred forever until you believe in Allah alone. This is the number one verse, Quran 64, that so many Islamic radicals, I've seen them cite and quote about how you're obligated, if you're a Muslim, to have hatred for non-Muslims. Okay, because it's right here. It says, "Enmity and hatred has appeared between us forever until you believe in Allah alone." So if you're a non-Muslim, you don't believe in Allah, I have to hate you until such time as you come to believe in Allah. I've mentioned it before many times, even on my YouTube channel. One of my oldest videos that I made, it's not me, but it's a translation. I show an Egyptian cleric, Yasser al-Burhami, and he's sitting there talking. He's given a sermon. It's in Arabic, so I translate it. I put subtitles, and the whole sermon is about this doctrine. And he goes on to say, yeah, of course, even if you're a Muslim man and you're married to one of the Ahl al-Kitab, one of the people of the book, Christians or Jews, because Muslim men are allowed to marry them, because this is pure patriarchy. It's okay for a Muslim man who's superior, because he's a man, to marry an infidel because he's in charge and his children are Muslims, etc., etc. Whereas you cannot have, of course, a non-Muslim man marry a Muslim woman, a Christian or Jewish man. But anyway, he's talking about it, and he says, well, yeah, of course it's okay, but you have to hate them. You gotta, if you're a Muslim man, you're married to a Christian or a Jewish woman, you have to hate her in your heart. Now you can have, he literally goes on to say, you can find the video. He literally goes on to say, you can have sex with her and enjoy her whatever way you want. Maybe she has wealth, you can enjoy the wealth, but you cannot let the hatred in your heart ever extinguish. And you need her to know that you hate her. Okay, but then he gives you some caveats of how to make life work. And so let's say with this woman, this Muslim man, he's married, let's say, to a Christian, a Coptic woman in Egypt, and let's say they have kids who are, of course, Muslim. So he can come in and say hi to everyone in the room, implying he's saying hi to her. But in his heart, he's only saying the salam to the Muslim kids, not her. Oh, man. Anyway, this is the sort of logic that is being promulgated amongst the followers of Allah. All right. Now, to continue and to finalize this business of al-wala wal-bara, loyalty and enmity, love and hate, it's actually shaped Islamic cultures. And in these environments, many Muslims, as you might imagine, feel strong pressure not to say or do anything that could damage the image of the Muslim community or bring discredit to Islam. So here we're looking at the first part. Usually I talk about the second part, okay, loyalty and hatred, love and hate. I usually talk about the hate. How if you're a Muslim, you have to have hatred for the infidel. Okay, that's what we just got done talking about. But now we're looking at the love for fellow Muslims. So basically what's going on is if you are engaged, that you're a Muslim, you have to cover up and help your fellow Muslims, even if they are raping little British girls, because those are infidels. Where's your loyalty? Okay. So it gives an example, actually. This has manifested itself in this current gang rape crisis in Britain. So let me read to you this quote. It says, quote, after confiding in a female teacher that her father, an imam, was beating her, the teacher informed the deputy head, who arranged for a male Pakistani Muslim social worker to meet with her at school. Initially terrified because of his background, she knew what's up. Why would you bring a Pakistani Muslim to come help me when I'm complaining about my Pakistani imam father, is what's going on here. Hanan eventually opened up to him about being treated as a domestic servant, fearing a forced marriage and enduring physical abuse. So the girl finally said, fine, he's a Pakistani like I am. I'm going to tell him the truth. You know, this social worker, I'm going to trust him. It continues. That same afternoon, she returned home to find the social worker speaking with her father and relaying everything she had said. While the social worker was present, her father acted kindly. But once he left, her father subjected her to a severe beating and rape. That's what it says. Threatened to kill her if she ever spoke again, and imprisoned her in the cellar for days. When Hanan later encountered the social worker at school and refused further contact, he reportedly told her, quote, hey, I was just doing what I thought was right. You know that. It's not right to betray your community. So there you go again. All right. And it continues. Similar patterns have appeared in accounts from grooming gang survivors. Some have described approaching the police only to be interviewed by Muslim officers who switched off the recording device and urged the girl to abandon her complaint due to supposed lack of evidence. So this is how loyalty and enmity, al-wala wal-bara', has impacted this particular crisis. Okay, we already looked at the first part, which is, yeah, of course, the tribalism, the hatred. You're the infidel. I'm going to abuse you. But now is the second part. Oh, as a Muslim, I have to have loyalty to fellow Muslims. I can't expose them. If anything, I have to cover up for them, like Sadiq Khan is doing, your mayor of London. Now, there's others. I'm going over the ones that I actually think are very applicable. So it talks a little bit about, some of these are doctrines that are not necessarily directly applicable, but they create a conducive environment to this whole grooming, rape gang business. So, for example, Islam contains, of course, multiple provisions that mandate the covering and seclusion of women. All right. For example, Quran 33:33 instructs women to, quote, stay in your houses and do not flaunt yourselves. Okay. And so that kind of culture suggests that when a woman appears in public without covering or remains outside the protected space of the home, she's seen as sexually available and promiscuous. And this is exactly actually the case when I was giving you the example of what happens in Egypt. Remember, I told you about all 99% of women, etc., being sexually harassed in the streets. The reason is precisely that, because Muslim men are taught that if a woman leaves her home and she doesn't have a male guardian, yeah, she's a prostitute. She wants it. Okay, and so it's her fault. Remember, I even gave you the percentage of the majority of the men who engage in this behavior in Egypt. The overwhelming majority of them believe it's a woman's fault. And okay, so check out this quote, which really underscores. I gave you an example from Egypt, but check this out. Following the high-profile convictions of Muslim men of Lebanese background for rape in Sydney, Australia. Remember we mentioned it, the Scaf gang, Muhammad and Bilal. Okay, so after those guys who raped all these girls in Australia, sadistically mocked them, humiliated them, etc., etc., the country's Grand Mufti, Australia's Grand Mufti. Why does it even have that? But Sheikh Taj al-Din al-Hilali, controversially, I'm reading the quote, the report, placed blame on the victims for not being covered and not remaining in their homes. He said, quote, if you take out uncovered meat and place it outside without cover, and the cats come to eat it, whose fault is it? The cats or the uncovered meat? The uncovered meat is the problem. If she was in her room, in her home, in her hijab, no problem would have occurred. So, come on, get with it, Australians. If you're women don't want to get raped, then put on the hijab and sit home. This is multiculturalism. And then, okay, so now we can also talk about things like age. As young as 11, these girls were being attacked and raped. I'm sure even younger. But what does that go back to? Well, that goes back to the Prophet Muhammad, right? And he married Aisha when she was 6 years old, and he made an arrangement with her father, Abu Bakr, and then he consummated the marriage when she was 9. Okay. So that right there justifies it. Remember, Muhammad is the perfect man. He's described in the Quran as the man to follow and to copy. Whatever. And this is, if you're a Sunni, that word, you've heard it, right? Sunnis and Shias. Sunni Muslims, who are the overwhelming majority of the Muslims of the world, like the Pakistanis and the Afghanis and the Arabs, those are Sunnis. They're named after a word that means to follow Muhammad, his example, to follow his sunnah. That's what the word means. So if it was okay for Muhammad to marry and consummate from 6 to 9, Aisha, it's absolutely okay for everyone else. Then now we get to the good stuff. Jihad and sex slavery. All right. So as is well known, during a jihad, which is, of course, just holy war, Islamic holy war against infidels, and it doesn't need any justification. The war is basically, you're an infidel. That's how Islam spread. Every country that is today called Islamic was a non-Muslim country, and it was attacked because it was peopled by infidels. And the Muslims, following the doctrine of jihad, made sure to conquer them and conquer the country. And that's how it is. That's how the Muslim world was forged. Now, in the context of jihad, the Quran makes abundantly clear, and Islamic law makes clear that you can enslave the infidel, males and females. Okay, but the females, it explicitly talks about them as they're not human. Okay, you've already seen the dehumanizing language that I've read to you and quoted about infidels as being not even as being animals. But when it talks about, for example, in Quran, I believe it's 424. There's others actually. It talks about a man can have 1, 2, 3, 4 wives, can copulate with 4 women, his wives, and it says as many as your right hand possesses. Okay, and what does that mean? Well, the Arab exegetes have made it abundantly clear that which your right hand possesses is basically sex slaves, women that you have, infidel women that you have subjugated and enslaved. Okay. And it's really interesting. I once did a deep dive, rather linguistically, back in my more scholarly days, like 15 years ago, where I wrote an article to show you that even the pronouns being used for these women in Arabic, ma malakat aymankum, this is the phrase, that which your right hand possess. It's not men malak aymankum. Men would mean who your right hand possess. Ma means it, the thing that you possess with your right hand. So it's even captured in the language that these are basically commodities, okay, for you to capture and copulate with freely as you want. And of course, sex with a sex slave, even though Islam does have sexual regulations, zina, adultery, is banned. You're not supposed to have extramarital sex, but as seen in that verse, that is not extramarital sex with your slave, these slave girls, because they're not even human. Okay. So from here, I think you can start seeing the mentality that has been forged into into these Muslim men who come live in the West, and why you're seeing what you're seeing. All right. And you can say, well, okay, there's Islamic sex slavery during a jihad. Well, technically, the Muslims in Britain and in Germany, they're not involved in jihad, so they can't enslave anyone legally. Well, yeah, legally that's true, but humans are good at rationalizing. And even the report gives various examples of how humans rationalize. And, okay, if I'm at war and I have to hate the infidel, and I do, and I'm in this country, an infidel country, and somehow or other I can subdue a woman and turn her into my slave. Well, isn't that the same thing? So in Rotherham, for instance, one perpetrator named Muhammad, there's a really weird name, branded his victim with the letter M as a mark of ownership. She's his slave, so he put M for Muhammad, stamped it on her. Survivors have described being compelled to perform domestic tasks, such as cooking and cleaning for their captors, while enduring repeated sexual violation, mirroring the treatment of household slaves. Journalist Andrew Norfolk captured this mindset when he observed, quote, some of these Muslim kids have got an idea, probably because it's quite convenient for them, that Britain's been designated a land of war. So certain things have become permissible in terms of the enemy. I think some of these guys think it's okay to do stuff to the white girls that they wouldn't dream of doing to Muslim girls. Exactly. That's the point. Okay? Because they are in England or in a Western land, which according to Islamic teaching is part of Dar al-Harb, the land of war, the land where you are supposed to have jihad and conquer. Okay, they've decided, okay, well, I've somehow or other I've conquered her, even if I've by manipulating her. So now this is my slave, and it's a-okay. It's in the Quran. It's all legitimate, right? Um, then it talks a little bit about dhimmitude, and this is very interesting. This is a point I've made many times before. Dhimmitude, or the dhimma, of course, in the Quran 929 talks about how Muslims are commanded to fight the people of the book, Jews and Christians, until they pay tribute and feel themselves utterly subdued. Okay. And then there's a host of sort of debilitating stipulations that Jews and Christians who have been subjugated must live by, all right, in order to live in an Islamic polity. Okay. So they have to pay the jizya, but they also have to feel themselves subdued in many different ways, including by not being treated equal. They are at best second, third class citizens, et cetera, et cetera. Now, in this case, a lot of the Muslims who come to Britain and to the West in general, they just find that the Brits and the Western people act like dhimmis. Okay. So when you willingly act like a cowed subject and yeah, I'm a second class, I'm not going to bother you. I'm going to toe the line. I'm not going to inconvenient you, sir. I remember one Pakistani from England. I think I debated him a long, long time ago. And his name is Anjem Chowdhury. You might have heard of him. He was rather notorious at the time. I believe he went to jail eventually, but there's a video of him that was circulating, and he's talking to fellow Muslims, Pakistanis, probably in Urdu, but it has subtitles. And he had many children, of course, in England, and they were all on welfare, as was he. And he mocked it and said, "Well, yeah, this is jizya from the Quranic verse I just told you, Quran 929, where the infidel, the dhimmi, has to pay tribute to his Islamic overlord." So he said, "Yeah, they pay us welfare, all of us, because this is it's the right. They have to do that. This is our right as Muslims. We are their overlords, so they have to pay us tribute." So I tell you all this because obviously this dynamic, the dhimitude, as it's been called, is very much an aspect of what happened, because the as we saw in that report, the failures are just beyond disgusting, of the police, of the authorities, of the social workers. To the Muslims, it just makes sense. You're a dhimmi. You're my slave. Of course, you're not going to call me out. Of course, you're not going to investigate me. Of course, you're going to turn a blind eye. I'm your overlord. And of course, what do the Brits do in this case? Yeah, they actually concede to that mentality. And so, as you can see, it's a vicious dynamic that feeds. Well, the one feeds the other. All right. All right. So that's the Islamic doctrine. All right. This is now we've seen what's going on, what's happening in Britain and elsewhere. We've seen it's not just Pakistanis. It's actually, once you leave Britain, it's Pakistanis in Britain because, yeah, they're the majority of the Muslims. But once you leave it, it's the same dynamic, whether it's in Australia, Sweden, Germany, or elsewhere. I actually remember reading many, many years ago something about Somalis in Minnesota involved in this sort of rape gang culture. There was some story I remember many years back, which makes sense because Somalis happen to be the Muslim majority group in formerly Viking Minnesota. So they're preying on their girls. All right. And now we've seen the doctrines, how they feed into this mentality. And now let's look at what I consider to be the most important aspect, history. Okay. Because it's one thing to talk about doctrine. And, okay, the Quran says X, Y, and Z. Muhammad said this. The Imams say that. Of course, that's absolutely all important. And that's why I read it to you and I talked about it. But for me, history has always been almost more important because what it is a manifestation of the doctrine. It's one thing if it's just written in books. Well, there's all kinds of things written in old books. We know the familiar charge. Well, look at the Old Testament. It's full of this and that, and people don't do it. So, but in this case, let's take a quick look at history and a lot of details. But before I do that, and to cap off the doctrine, let me just give you a few more quotes to just show you a few modern quotes from others that really validate how influential the doctrinal aspect is. So one British Imam, Dr. Taj Hargey, confirmed, this is actually in the report, that the majority of he wrote the majority of the, quote, Imams promote grooming rings. They promote it. So when a Muslim in the UK goes to the mosque and listens to the Imam preach, they are promoting what's happening. Okay, he continues. He said that Muslim men are taught that women are, quote, second-class citizens, little more than chattel or possessions over whom they have absolute authority. And that the Imams in general, they preach a doctrine that, quote, denigrates all women but treats whites with particular contempt. Imagine that. This is your country. You bring in all these people from the third world, starving. You give them all kinds of boons. They start grooming and raping your children and then teaching everyone around them, the Muslims, to have nothing but contempt for you. All right. And just to show you like the logic of this, again, so you don't think this is just something that happens in the West. We're talking about very important dynamics and how actually Western appeasement exacerbates this Islamic behavior. But just to show you that this Islamic behavior is intrinsic, it's important to remember that this is actually happening all the time to non-Muslims in the Islamic world, non-Muslim minorities. You may know for many years I've been tracking and writing about the persecution of Christians in Islamic lands. And it's the same exact thing, okay? And these are not girls from broken homes. These are not girls who go out and party. These are girls who, they're going to school or going to church and they get snatched, all right, oftentimes. And now let me read to you a quote. This is from a human rights activist, and he was speaking about a Muslim man's rape of a 9-year-old Christian girl, all right? And he writes this, quote, such incidents occur frequently. Christian girls are considered goods to be damaged at leisure. Abusing them is a right. According to the community's mentality, it is not even a crime. The Muslim community, he means. Muslims regard them as spoils of war. Well, of course they do. We just saw all those Quranic verses and theological underpinning behind this business. And by the way, I'm giving you the sources of some of the quotes and some I'm not. So here's the deal. These are all things I've written and extrapolated from older sources. And a lot of them are from articles that are on my Substack. And this historical portion, which I'm going to give you right now, is primarily from my book, Sword and Scimitar, because I'm going to talk about history now. So if you want to know the source, go to my Substack articles or check out the book for the historical aspects, and you can get the exact source. But for now, this is just a live stream. I'm giving it to you as I read it. All right. Now, check this out. Back in 2011, I wrote an article, so you can look it up. The title of the article is called, if you can find it, because a lot of times these articles, even if you Google them and put quotes around them, they won't even show up. But the title of the article I wrote, it's Muslim Woman Seeks to Revive Institution of Sex Slavery. and I wrote it. It came out on June 6th, 2011. And it's about I translated it from Arabic video, and it was about a female politician, activist, who's trying to combat sexual immorality in Kuwait. That's noble. And the way she wanted to do this was she was suggesting that Muslims start importing white sex slaves. Because as we've seen, if you have a sex slave, there's nothing immoral about that. But if you don't, and everyone around you is just a Muslim woman, you might be committing adultery, and that's bad. But since these white sex slaves are just animals and you can do anything with them, that's what she was suggesting. All right. So she explained in the article how she once asked the clerics living in Mecca, when she visited Mecca, the great city, the holiest city of Islam, about the legality of sex slavery. And they all confirmed it to be perfectly legitimate. So then she said in the video, quote, "A Muslim state must first attack a Christian state." Sorry, I mean any non-Muslim state. This is her. I actually jotted this down from a video. Right. So she says a Muslim state must first attack a Christian state. Sorry, I mean any non-Muslim state. And they, the women, the future sex slaves, must be captives of the raid. Is this forbidden? Not at all. According to Islam, sex slaves are not at all forbidden. This is her talking. Okay. And then she went on to explain what sort of infidel women are ideal. Right. And she said, quote, "In the Chechnya war, for example, surely there are female Russian captives. So go and buy those and sell them here in Kuwait. Yes, better that than to have our men engage in forbidden sexual relations with our women. I don't see any problem in this. No problem at all." Okay. If you don't believe me, let me see, because I did pull this article out. Let's see if I can pull it up, just if you want to look it up. All right, never mind. I'm not good at this. But so before we proceed, I see there's a lot of activity going on. Let's I'm now okay, I've given you what's going on, I've given you the doctrine. Now let's we're going to get into what I consider the most interesting part, which is the unknown history that I had to extrapolate over the years and put in these books. But let's take some of your chats. Tarot Press. It's 5 to 12. I can't breathe. Check UN human rights. Country. You can. Okay. Well, thanks. Again, Tarot Press. Authorities are unreliable. Historic noon bells still ring true. Papal Bull 1456 Belgrade. Bought Vienna 70 years. Enough for 21st century? Yeah, these are references to how, of course, the authorities are unreliable. Historic noon bells that deals with the siege of Belgrade by the Ottomans and how John Hunyadi basically delivered it. And because of that, the noon bells were inaugurated. Not that most people know that. Once again, a historic thing, noon bells, church noon bells, goes back to Islamic aggression. Tarot Press. You are like Arthur at the stone. You pull the sword of knowledge free while everyone stares. You are my third sword and defender of knowledge, visiting Malta after next book. Your loyal doormat. Well, thank you very much. These are very compliments, but we'll have no doormats here. As you may know, I'm not into the doormat business. But thanks. Tarot Press, Miss Just War Stream. Am I a doormat for thinking this too blunt? Imagine UK patriots like Rupert Tommy rally at noon church bells. Folks don't know why EU churches ring so elaborately at 12. Yeah, that's what I just said. No, I don't think you're a doormat. Don't be one. You don't sound like a doormat. If you're quoting what we're talking about, you're not a doormat. Hi, Dina. Godfrey. Hey, Raymond. I finished Defenders of the West, and now I'm at chapter 40 in Two Swords of Christ. Thank you for bringing to light the true color of Islam. You're welcome. and I'm glad you're reading those books and finding them somewhat edifying. Lies destroy lives. You did a video about walking like a duck and quacking like a duck. Good video. Yes, I did. Thank you for reminding me of that. And the point of, again, to reiterate, this is very important, but Westerners seem to think it's a virtue to not see what's before their eyes. Okay, so after everything I've said, for example, and you come across a Muslim man doing all this, a lot of people, their first instinct is to actually like, no, it can't be because that's stereotypical. It's anyone else but him, and that's what but sometimes the most commonsensical, the most simple logic is all you need. Okay, yeah, if it walks and quacks and acts like a duck, it's a duck. You don't have to make it more complicated. When you do, then your society is destroyed and your girls are raped and you sit around doing nothing. Christina, thank you for your hard work on this, Raymond. Between you and getting back to the Bible, my faith has been reinvigorated. I'm happy to hear that. Good for you. Yeah, because I think we're all starting to find out, and I'm part of this too, that, our faith, our Christianity is not what they told us it is. It's something actually a lot deeper and richer and much more meaningful. It's not just some abstract idea I keep in my head and then I live anyway. It's actually something that people don't want us to think and do, even though it's actually all around in the Bible and especially historically manifest. Varun, why do Muslims dominate prison system in US and UK? Why do you think? Lies destroy lives. Christian men are encouraged to learn self-control and honor and protect women. Not so the men who follow the false prophet. Yeah, that's the tempering factor of Christianity. That's what's known as chivalry. What we've seen with the Islamic stuff is actually it's primitive, you know, if you really want to call it really toxic masculinity, codified theologically. But what Christianity did, it didn't say, okay, stop being a man, no more masculinity, no more patriarchy. It didn't say that, but it tempered it. Okay, it gave it a more noble cast. All right, and that's the reality that they don't want you to know. Which means you can still go to war, you can still fight and do all that sort of thing. But you're not a savage. You're not doing it out of hatred and sadism and that sort of thing. Tarot Press, Lara Logan, ring a bell? Yeah, I think she was one of those who was involved in Egypt and who was groped or, I don't know, maybe raped. CBS News reporter got pulled into crowd in Cairo packed streets. Also a short blonde. Short interview with her, findable on YouTube. Yeah, go find it. Lies destroy lives. If a man's blood does not boil while hearing this, he is not a man. I agree, actually. Christina, my DNA says I'm English, Gallic, Celtic, Nordic. I'm blonde with green eyes. I'd love to visit the lands of my ancestors, but I feel like I can't now without extreme risk. Yeah, you probably can't unless you put a burqa on because your lands are their lands now. I was abducted in Algeciras, I'm probably not pronouncing it right, Spain in the 70s. Luckily, I was reported missing and found. Well, I'm happy for you, not the abduction part, but good to see that you were found. Lies destroy lives. Raymond's videos on Tawreya, Takeya, Sharia, and the word ribat are really important. Thank you. I appreciate that. And I agree, if I may say so myself. Uh, Sounds like a mafia gang, only 10 times worse. Well, exactly. That is what Islam does. It takes the worst behavior of men, but it makes it worse because now it says God's behind it. Think about that. It's if you're a regular whatever race, religion, man, and you believe in and you rape and you engage in crimes, yeah, okay, we have a lot of that. But imagine now I tell you, oh, actually, if you do that, you're holy. As long as you target only certain people, not your own, not the tribe, right? And you can target women and children and men and rob and destroy. Now you're holy, and you're actually gonna go to heaven. Yeah, that's a dangerous tonic right there. Grumpy Cat Granny, do you consider Islam a religion? And if so, how can we combat it given the US constitutional protections for freedom of religion? Well, yeah, this is a semantic argument. I don't know. What is a religion? How does one define that even? Just any belief in a supreme deity? Um, I think arguments can be made that the US Constitution, for example, I did this. I've written about it and I've made videos where you know, for example, when you're naturalized and you become a citizen, you have to take all these, oaths of breaking allegiance with any foreign power and swearing allegiance to the United States. Well, guess what? That's all antithetical to what Islam teaches in in the guise of the doctrine of loyalty and enmity, love and hate, al wala al wal barat. A Muslim can't do that unless he's lying in his heart and in doing taqiyya, which is, of course, what pious Muslims do. All right. So there's the Quran itself and Islam itself has all sorts of teachings that are completely antithetical to becoming a United States citizen. Right. But of course, the problem is we won't even look at that. How dare we? Freedom of religion. Okay. That's their holy book, even though it says raping and enslaving people, including little children, etc. Oh, it's okay. So yeah, depends on how we define these words. If you just say it's a religion and everyone freezes and that's what happens, then there's not little you can do. But if you actually look at the teachings and say, well, what are these teachings? And you find out, oh, a lot of them actually contradict core American values, maybe something can be done. Appreciate your insights. God bless. Thank you. Lies destroy lives. Mark Dury wrote an article called Australian Imams Stand Up for Sharia. It's the clerics that are the problem. Aren't they always? But who are the clerics? They're the people who stand and represent Islam, which means Islam itself is the problem. If the clerics of the religion are the problem or the theologians, that means the religion itself is the problem because the lay people don't know it and don't necessarily follow it. So they are not representing the religion. It's the clerics who represent it. If they're the problem, then that tells me the religion is the problem. Grapes to Jana. Your thoughts? Charlatan historian J.D. Hall, who claims Muslims and attacks churches on Tucker Carlson show. A lot of people have mentioned this to me, and I'm actually planning on a rebuttal. And I know what you're talking about, and it's pretty disgusting. Tucker Carlson had this fellow talking about, I don't remember something, but yeah, I saw the clip where he talks about, the Ottomans were so wonderful and they didn't persecute the Christians and this and that. What a joke. I mean, complete. All right, stay tuned. Hopefully, if I have the time. Tucker Carlson interviewed a Muslim apologist. He had the tenacity to claim the Ottomans were kind to Christians. Of course, Tucker believed him. Yep, that's what we just got done talking about. And it's complete joke. Is war close in the UK? Yeah, don't have my crystal ball, but I'll tell you this: either things get fixed ASAP, or war sounds pretty good, actually. Or just keep suffering and accept it because you're slaves. That's it. Either fix it the clean way, hopefully, or you accept your lot, or uh, that's how wars have always started, right? One group says you're mistreating me, and it's pointless to argue with you, and so I'm going to take matters into my own hands. Well, the Zut were benevolent to Muhammad. The Zut. Ah. The redneck aristocrat. What do you think is going to happen in the UK in the next 5 years, if you had to guess? That's a good one. I actually just said it, which is basically Okay, you have three choices. Either it gets fixed through the system, which increasingly seems impossible, but we'll see. Starmer's resigning and all that. I hope you don't fall for that. I'm not saying that that's they're giving you a freebie, but don't feel like, oh, okay, now we're winning, now I can kind of relax. Actually, if anything, now you should really double up and just demand even more, okay, because it's kind of working, right? I know he had other problems. I'm not saying he resigned because of this, even though this obviously was one of the big issues. But don't think that his resignation is going to change anything. Okay, in with the out, in with the out, in with the new. Doesn't matter. These politicians are just faces that come and go. All right. So yeah, his leaving doesn't mean anything really. Don't treat that as a great victory. Is what I'm telling you, because you're probably going to get something even worse from his party. So back to your question, either it gets fixed through the system, which would be ideal through elections, or people just you accept it. That's it. This is the world. I've lost my country. I've given it over to Muslims and Pakistanis, and our girls exist for them to rape because we're slaves. Or you do something about it, because if the system won't do it for you, and the Muslims are not going to give it to you, well, then you do something about it. But people have not been bred to think that way anymore. We're not allowed to do that. This take matters into my own hands. Well, that's historic, people. Aussie Abe, hey Ray, I am currently producing a documentary in Aust about the dangers of Islam, specifically mosque requests for adhan amplification. Would you be interested in sharing your insights as a guest? Contact me on my website, and yeah, we'll see. Hi, thanks for the super chat. Bull Shark. Despite their heavy secular nationalism, I highly doubt Japan has a fighting chance against Islam without Christian help. What are your thoughts on their predicament? Well, I mean, they have a chance as long as they keep it out of their country. This is the whole thing. You don't have a problem with Islam if you keep it out of your country. And keeping it out of your country is very easy. Poland did it, Hungary did it. Not that hard. Once you bring them in, yeah, you're going to have all sorts of problems. So if Japan, I don't know what the latest development is. I remember there was some politician who wanted to bring them, and then another one said no, etc. But yeah, if Japan starts bringing them in, yeah, they're going to have a lot of problems. Thanks. Mushy season. What was the one Christian doctrine that helped stop them best in Spain in 7-Eleven? Christian doctrine that helped stop them best in Spain? Well, 7-Eleven is when the Muslims conquered. They weren't stopped. Um, so sorry, not following. Veronica, to be clear, I was abducted into the sex trade, putting me on a boat to North Africa. I've read a lot of those stories. In fact, when we continue right now, I think one of them, are you Kate? I think one of the women that are in this report, but I remember reading about her before, whose name, pseudonym, I assume is Kate, talks about being taken to North Africa and so forth. We'll get to that. Mort Rouge, the new discourses is doing a deep dive into milestones with a series. Ray, you may be interested. All right. Thanks for letting me know. 88 El Guapo, you gave me allergies when reading about Skanderbeg in Defenders of the West. God bless you, brother. God bless you. Is there something to say about Euro men fighting harder between the Janissaries and the Lionheart, Hunyadi, Skanderbeg, Vlad III? What's there to say? That is the heritage of Europe. And yeah, their men fought tooth and nail. They had something to fight for. They believed in something higher than themselves. They believed in their faith, their God, their culture, their civilization, their family, and they fought. Yeah, uh, that's the heritage of the West. The question is, will they reclaim it? Keep teaching people about this, Raymond. I will. Thanks. Grapes to Jenna. I read that Egypt has 0 cops on their national team in the World Cup while millions of cops live in there. Yep, that's a real thing. That's actually, there's been reports and all sorts of cases about how, you know, they won't allow cops on their national soccer team out of the typical standard discrimination. You can go to a website, Coptic Solidarity. They've written a lot about that, actually. They've had petitions and whatnot. Joe of the Masks. Every time I try to point this out to a friend of mine, he always mentions the same Muslim imam he knew, which was nice to him, and says it's just individuals, not Islam. Is there any argument you'd use? Yeah, the argument is I don't care what this or that guy or imam or Muslim says or does. I care what coincides and comports with Islamic teaching. So everything I've been telling you, we've been reading quotes from the Quran and Islamic doctrine and so forth. That's Islam. Now, if a Muslim tells me I don't believe in that, okay, good for you. That doesn't exonerate Islam. That exonerates you, I suppose. But you do not in any way, shape, or form reflect Islam at large. So there it is. I'm interested in what the religion teaches, not which this or that practitioner does. There's a difference there. Discrimination against Copts, I mean. Well, yeah, the Copts and the soccer in Egypt, I understood. All right, we really need to get going here. Asmongold recently made a video on Starmer Step Down, compared it to a World of Warcraft raid, making a tank swap to reset again. Yeah, next tank, same raid party. Exactly. That's what I'm saying. You know, these politicians, you know, one face comes in and another goes out. Don't fall for that. That doesn't mean anything at this point. Grapes. Japan had a Christian PM who helped bring over 250,000 Pakistanis and Bangladeshis into Japan. A Shinto practitioner lady is trying to remove them. Well, good for her. That Christian is probably a doormat, which is not much of a Christian in my book. Dave, hello, Raymond. Aside from the examples of Jesus at the temple, flipping the tables, and the Roman soldier, what other reasons or examples would you give to convince the doormat? Thank you for your work, sir. Okay, well, that's a subject of a forthcoming book, actually. So I can't, I mean, that's a whole book. I can't give you a full answer, but there's many examples. How about the Old Testament? It's kind of interesting. Isn't that part of the Bible? You know, pre-modern Christians, they actually read the Old Testament. To them, that was who they are. This represents us. You know, we're the new Israel. That's the, standard traditional Christian view. And how did the Israelites behave? Well, in warlike. The Old Testament, God is described as a man of war, and it's littered with militant verses. So what about that right there? Who said that's been abrogated? Anyway, that's really a good question. I have a lot of articles you can look at on my Substack where I talk about this. I think I wrote a recent one. The title is something doormats, and I talk about various verses and so forth. All right. So stay tuned for a future, for much more future talk. I'll be discussing this in future again, obviously. All right. Last one. Scarlet Rose. What blows my mind is that these atrocities happen right in front of people's eyes. Exactly. I think I'd be in shackles and on the 6 o'clock news after reacting to anything I saw or experienced. Yeah, I agree with you. And this is the paralysis, okay, that it's happening, and people just look at it and they don't know what to do except, oh, I'm going to vote for another guy. you know, it's really surreal. Okay, let's get back to it. That's enough of this. Now then, thank you all for your interest in super chats. Let's continue, because there's what I consider one of the more important parts coming up right now. Okay, so the history. What is the history of what we're talking about? We're talking about Muslims treating infidels like dirt, enslaving them, their women being sexually abused, raped, humiliated, sadistically treated in really graphic ways, as we've seen. Again, that report, the new report that came out, the Rupert Lowe report, you should look at it, because the It's not just rape. It's not just physical carnality. It's hatred. It's, we sadistically want to mistreat you because you're a dirty infidel. It comes out all the time. And as you're going to see, it came out in the history as well. All right. So now we've seen the doctrine. We've seen what's happening in the current era. Now let's look at the history. All right. And what you're going to see right now is that all these revelations of gang rapes, etc., targeting young white girls in the UK, and of course, as we mentioned elsewhere, is actually as old as Islam itself, tracing back to Muhammad himself. We already saw he had slaves, he married a young girl, Aisha, etc., etc. But now let me read to you an academic quote, which again, now what I'm going to tell you, this is all from Sword and Scimitar. If you want to get the exact references, they're there. But this was written. This is now an academic book by a Muslim. It's actually a book about Byzantium, and he wrote an article. It's called his name is Ahmed Shboul. This is an academic, and he wrote Byzantium and the Arabs: the image of the Byzantines as mirrored in Arabic literature. Okay, and Byzantium, just so you know, is the Eastern Roman Empire. They call it Byzantium. All right. And he talks about how it was seen sort of, as a symbol of military and political power and as a society of great abundance, not unlike how Muslims would see, if that was the Eastern Roman Empire, the Byzantine Empire, this is how they see the West, right? Quote, symbol of military power, political power, and a society of great abundance. Okay. But there's more to it. So, Byzantium was further, he said, representative of fair-skinned or white people, or as they were known in Arabic, Benu al-Asfar. Now, Benu al-Asfar is a weird word. Benu means like son of, or like these people. And Asfar, it just means yellow. And linguists have kind of grappled with it, but the prevalent translation understanding is that it means the people of yellow. That's literally what it says. And the people of yellow is a reference to sort of light hair, fair hair, or fair skin. Okay, because that's what the people living in Byzantium, in Europe, in the Eastern Roman Empire, which was the first portion of Europe that the Muslims in the 7th century encountered during their conquest, Byzantium. Okay, so they referred to them as Benu al-Asfar, the children or the people of yellow, which again is understood as a reference to just fair skin, fair hair, yellow hair, that sort of thing. All right. Now he writes, this academic, let me read it to you. Quote, the Byzantines as a people were considered as fine examples of physical beauty, and youthful slaves and slave girls of Byzantine origin were highly valued. The Arabs' appreciation of the Byzantine female has a long history indeed. For the Islamic period, the earliest literary evidence we have is a hadith, a saying of the Prophet. Muhammad is said to have addressed a newly converted Arab by saying, quote, would you like the girls of Benu al-Asfar? I'm reading, this is a direct quote from this academic. And he continues, not only were Byzantine slave girls sought after for caliphal and other palaces, where some became mothers of future caliphs, but they also became the epitome of physical beauty, home economy, and the refined accomplishments. The typical Byzantine maiden who captures the imagination of the poets had blonde hair, blue or green eyes, a pure and healthy visage, lovely breasts, a delicate waist, and a body that is like camphor or a flood of dazzling light. All right. Now, while the essence of this excerpt is true, this is how the Muslims saw the Byzantines, you should not be duped by its overly romantic tone. All right. Like I said, this is written for a Western publication by an academic of Muslim background. And as such, it's very euphemistic to the point of implying that being a sex slave was desirable, as if her Arab owners were enamored devotees who merely doted over and admired her beauty from afar. All right. And so you saw in that quote, he talks about how Muhammad tried to cajole someone to go to war with him. So don't you want the Benu al-Asfar? All right. But there's more of this. Okay. So now here's another quote. Muhammad asked another convert Quote, would you like the girls of Banu al-Asfar as a way to entice him to join the jihad and reap its rewards, which in this case, of course, included the possibility of enslaving and raping fair skinned haired women. Okay. Not as some idealistic discussion on beauty. All right. So even though in that excerpt, he's trying to make it sound like, oh, the Arabs looked up to the Byzantines, they just thought they were so beautiful. Well, yeah, but the whole point in telling, he's cajoling him so they can go and rape them, treat them like they treat the Brits. In other words, there's nothing beautiful about that, right? And this enticement that Muhammad engaged in actually backfired with another Muslim who refused Muhammad's call to invade Byzantine territory in the so-called Tabuk campaign. I think that happened around 630, 2 years before Muhammad's death. Supposedly there was going to be a war with the Byzantines, but it never came to pass. And before that, before that, Muhammad tried to cajole a man named Wahab. And Muhammad said, "O Abu Wahab, would you not like to have scores of Roman or Byzantine women and men as concubines and servants?" Wahab responded, "O Messenger of Allah, my people know that I am very fond of women, and if I see the women of the Romans, I fear I will not be able to hold back. So do not tempt me by them, and allow me not to join, and instead I will assist you with my wealth." So Muhammad's trying to cajole this man to join the campaign against the Romans, the Byzantines, by saying, "Do you not want scores of these Banu al-Asfar?" And the man says, "Yeah, I know. I really want them, but please don't tempt me because I'm going to lose my mind. I won't know what to do. So don't tempt me by them. And instead of joining the war, I'm going to give you money. All right, the jihad." Now, believe it or not, this particular anecdote was actually is part of the Quran, because Muhammad in the Hadith agreed, but he was apparently not very impressed, because, like we said, Abu Wahab could have joined the jihad and he could have had all the women that he wanted if he conquered them, or if they were conquered as part of the spoils. Okay, as we saw, part of that Quranic verse, you can copulate with all the women you want, as long as they're the infidel slaves, right? And then in response, the Quran 949 was promptly revealed, condemning that man, Abu Wahab, to hell because he was a hypocrite for failing to join the jihad. So, in other words, Muhammad himself realized, okay, you're a hypocrite. Your excuse in saying, I'm going to pay you money and help you financially, but not joining the jihad. Okay, yeah, you're a hypocrite because you're scared. Okay. At any rate, a more critical reading of the aforementioned academic excerpt from Ahmed Shboul that I read to you, right, finds that European slave girls were not highly valued, as he said, or appreciated as if they were, precious statues. They were held out as sexual trophies to entice Muslims to the jihad, right? And the idea, by the way, which he mentions, that some sex slaves became mothers to future caliphs is so meaningless, because Islam is, of course, uber patriarchal, meaning mothers, regardless of whether they're Muslim or not, have absolutely no say in their son's lineage. This is why all the caliphs and sultans, the Ottomans and so forth, even though they were born of infidel slave women, oftentimes Europeans, we don't know who their mothers are. Even when the mother is a Muslim, nobody knows because it's considered irrelevant. So telling us that, oh, some of them went on to become the mothers of caliphs, that didn't matter. They were still treated like slaves. Okay, they were just breeding machines. And this business, so the fair skin thing, which he talks about, this shabul, it's everywhere in the modern era. I mean, we've seen, we're going to see it. And we're going to talk about it. What happened in Britain, right? That they're picking on them particularly, not least because of their fair skin, fair eye, et cetera, et cetera. Now, do you remember one of ISIS's sex slave auctions a long, long time ago? Let me see if I can pull up the report. But they were selling Yazidis, and they actually were boasting that some of these Yazidis have light hair, so they wanted more money out of them. They were selling them for more money. Let me see if I can find it. Yeah, here we go. Look at this old news report. A scene at ISIS slave market. $500 for a green-eyed girl. Right? So this has been going on, obviously, in the past and in the present. Now, after Muhammad and this business about don't you want the Benuel Asfar, the blonde, the fair people, does it end there? No. We have the same exact thing go on century after century in the jihad on Europe, right? Whether it was at the hands of Arabs, Berbers, Turks, Tatars, Muslims, they all habitually, in the sources, you can see it in Sword and Scimitar and my other books, try to entice their men to go to jihad in Europe, oftentimes by citing the women there waiting for them. All right. The beautiful women, the Benual Asfar waiting for them. As one example, I spoke about it recently. I spoke about the conquest of Spain, which began in 711 by the Muslims, including the Berber, Tariq bin Zayed, the jihadi hero who conquered, who came from the Maghreb or Morocco and sailed into Spain and conquered it in 711. He actually enticed his followers, the Muslims, by saying, quote, "You must have heard numerous accounts of this land. You must know how the maidens, as beautiful as houris, are awaiting your arrival, reclining on soft couches in the sumptuous palaces of crowned lords and princes." So basically, he mixed all the enticing themes at once. There's these beautiful women who are like houris. Houris, of course, are the Islamic supernatural women who gratify Allah's favorites in perpetuity when they die in heaven. Okay, and their hymen grows back all the time, and you get to enjoy yourself, and you have many of them, and they have firm, large breasts, etc., etc. So Tariq was basically saying that the Spanish women, the Goths, the Visigoths, in that time, are waiting for you, and they're waiting in rich palaces of crowned lords and princes on sumptuous couches. Okay, so not only did you get the women, you're going to also plunder and raid and take all of the infidels' possessions. All right, and then after thoroughly conquering Spain around 715, Tariq and his overlord Musa, the governor, they traveled to Damascus along the North African route, and they took with them 30,000 Spanish slaves. All right. They took them to the Caliph Al-Walid. And according to the Islamic historian Al-Makari, Al-Walid was so utterly delighted by the, quote, resources of the people of Spain, especially the beauty of its young girls. All right. And thereafter, just so you know, Spain became, golden age Spain, which we're always told about how wonderful it was because it featured awesome Muslim golden age business. Actually, it was an emporium of the Islamic slave trade, primarily of Europeans, because it was on the continent. So it was one of the easiest places to launch raids into Europe, including on northern Spaniards. In France and all throughout the Mediterranean. So historian, in his book, The Myth of the Andalusian Paradise, Dario Fernandez Morera, and if you're interested in this topic, you should read it. He writes that because the Umayyads particularly valued blonde or red-haired Frank or Galician women as sexual slaves, Al-Andalus, meaning Muslim-occupied Spain, became a center for the trade and distribution of slaves. Christian subjects were sometimes even required to make an annual tribute, not of money or horses or arms, but of 100 beautiful women to ornament the harems. Okay, so in part, if you wanted to be a vassal Christian instead of being destroyed and killed by your Muslim overlords, you had to not give them money. I'm sure they were getting money too. You had to give them the most beautiful women that you had. This business, the sexual enslavement of fair European women, is so embroiled in medieval era that few people know that, as in the words of M.A. Khan, an author and former Muslim, he writes that, quote, "It's impossible to disconnect Islam from the Viking slave trade, because the supply was absolutely meant for meeting the Islamic world's unceasing demand for the prized white slaves and for white sex slaves." These are his words. All right. Emmett Scott, another historian, goes so far as to say that, quote, it was the caliphate's demand for European slaves that called forth the Viking phenomena in the first place. So what they're saying is, well, who were the Vikings? Well, Scandinavian raiders, pagan raiders. And we know, of course, they raided lots. They raided England and France and all around Europe. And what did they do? Well, they plundered, of course, but they took a lot of captives. Now, in the popular imagination, in the movies and the series, these captives are captives of the Vikings. And I'm sure many of the people who were raided and enslaved by the Vikings were kept by the Vikings. But the fact is, the overwhelming majority of them was to get gold from the caliphate. So they were selling them to the caliphs. And we know this. One of the main reasons we know this is because you find all the time in Viking burial mounds, you find Arab gold coins. Well, what's the commodity that they were getting? Was it furs? Maybe. But, or was it fair skinned slaves, which the sources make abundantly clear that the Muslims and the caliphates often wanted? Yeah, I think it's the latter. By the way, an interesting observation. Isn't it interesting? You have these the Vikings who were pagans. They were white Europeans, very white, obviously, Northern Europeans, Scandinavians, and they were pagans, and they would attack their fellow racial counterparts, Englishmen, Frenchmen, who were white but were Christian. They would attack them and sell the women and the men to the Muslims. Kind of reminds me of them right now, doesn't it? Okay. Like, the left, the pagan left in Britain and in the West in general, who are covering up all this, who are appeasing Islam, who are sacrificing, all these white girls to the Muslims. It kind of sounds very similar, very reminiscent. The continuities continue, don't they? And speaking of the continuities, I'm going to give you a lot more examples of modern things. But since we're talking about slavery, one of the women, I mentioned her, I said Kate, because she's in my notes. I want to talk about her. So all the women, if you read the report, this British report, the slave rape, the gang rape report, there's a lot of testimonials from women. Oftentimes are women now, but they were girls when this happened to them. And they give you anecdotes of what happened to them. So one of them that caught my eye, and this actually, I read it many years ago, and I included it in one of my articles, but it's in the report as well. But her name is the pseudonym is Kate Alicia, and she revealed the extent of her sexual victimization by Muslim men. This included, of course, the usual, such as the plying of drugs and gang rapes by as many as 70 men. But it had an interesting twist. So, according to the report, quote, at one point during her abuse, she was trafficked from Britain to the North African country of Morocco, where she was prostituted and repeatedly raped. She was kept in an apartment in Marrakesh, where another girl, no more than 15, was also kept for sexual purposes. I can't remember how many times I'm raped that first night or by who, Kate recounts. And, the fact that she was seen as a piece of meat is evident in many other ways. The Pakistani men I came into contact with made me believe I was nothing more than a slut, a white whore. They treated me like a leper, apart from when they wanted sex. I was less than human to them. I was rubbish. Okay. So there again, you get all the ingredients, the supremacism, the Islamic supremacism. You're trash because you're an infidel, and we will treat you, you're not, you're nothing more than a slut. They want her to make sure she knows that. You're a leper. We want to stay away from you, except when we want sex. And you're rubbish. And she says these are Pakistani men. So she's talking about the men she dealt with who initially groomed her in Pakistan. But now she ends up in Morocco. What does that have to do with Pakistan? Once again, this is North African Arabs of Berber background. Okay. But even that I found interesting because it's a reflection and has a pattern and continuity with history. Right. So, for example, thanks to Ottoman Turkic support for the slave raiding pirates of North Africa, the so-called Barbary states, right, of North Africa, where she went, Algiers, Morocco, Tunis, by 1541, they teemed with so many Christian captives who were taken from Europe that it was a common saying that a Christian slave was scarce a fair barter for an onion. Okay. That is how many slaves were raided and taken out of Europe, white slaves, and were being sold just in Algiers. Okay. That it wasn't, you were ripped off. You know, they weren't even worth the price of an onion. That was more valuable. That's how many they had there. Okay. And of course, they had that because they went as far as Iceland. No coastal line of Europe was just unrated. And we know, you can look at the Professor Robert Davis has written a book, and he basically says that we know for a fact that at least 1.25 million Europeans were enslaved just around the 16th century, just in that area. And we're not even talking about other areas. And it's for that reason, by the way, that much later, European observers noted how, quote, the inhabitants of Algiers have a rather white complexion. Well, yeah, because the Muslims there were procreating generation after generation with white slaves. Okay, but this particular one's very famous because it's well documented, the 1.25 million. But it was exactly the same everywhere else in the Islamic world. Okay, so the slave markets of the Ottoman Sultanate were for centuries so inundated with European flesh that slaves, especially children, would sell for pennies. And here's a quote: "A very beautiful slave woman was exchanged for a pair of boots." Okay, that's just how the surplus of slaves there was. And it was also the same, if not worse, in the Crimea. The Mongols, who became Muslims, okay, where something like at least 3 million Slavs were enslaved by the Ottomans, by these Mongols, who were the Ottomans' Muslim allies. They actually worked together, especially in the Siege of Vienna, for example. And an eyewitness described how Christian men were castrated, the slaves, and savagely tortured, including by gouging their eyes out, whereas, quote, the young women are kept for wanton pleasures. Um, Here's even a recent quote I came across while I was perusing through my notes by Bernard Lewis, and he writes this in his book, Islam in the West. He writes, quote, Europeans saw themselves primarily as Christians threatened by a new assault from the old Islamic enemy. Among the faults and vices ascribed to the Turk, two themes dominated: arbitrary power and unbridled lust. So universal were these themes, and so striking the terms in which they were presented in both letters and arts. I can verify that, and it comes out in my books that if you look at the writings in the 15th, 16th, 17th, 18th century that talk about the chief Islamic enemy of Europe at the time, the Ottomans. Of course, there's the cruelty, the savagery, the rapaciousness, but over and over and over, it's the sexual lusts and unnaturalness, actually, as they call it, of the Turks. The unnatural aspect would be the sodomy and rape of men and boys. Okay, so that was kind of part and parcel of how the Europeans saw the Turks, which would be one of the last and most powerful and influential Muslim manifestations to terrorize Europe. Okay, now before moving on from the historical section, I definitely want to show you something. Pictures, actually. Give me one moment here. Okay, here we go. And then this is an article that I wrote on on my Substack. It's a picture article. And what I wanted to do is just show people that, okay, I'm giving you all these examples. I'm talking about historical documentation of what happened during the Islamic, slave raids and the hunt for European women. And the fact is, this isn't just documented in written textual records. This is even represented in art. All right. That's how widespread and how well known this phenomenon was. So let me show you what I'm talking about. Here's an article I wrote. It primarily consists of images: Islam's sexual enslavement of white women, a history in paintings. And all it is all these paintings. So here you go. These are all paintings made around the 19th century by a lot of Orientalist painters who went to the Middle East, the Islamic world. And this is what they saw. Okay. Fair-skinned, oftentimes European women being sold in the markets. Okay. Here's one. Here's another one. This one, actually, let me read to you what it's about. It was painted by Konstantin Makovsky in 1877, and the title is "The Bulgarian Martyresses," and it depicts actual events from a year earlier when Ottoman irregular soldiers, the so-called Bashi Bazouks or crazy heads in translation, raped and massacred the Christian women of Bulgaria and their children. In this image, sorry. In this image, a Bible is mockingly placed atop one of the victims that was raped and killed, as you can see right there, as the perpetrators prepare to perpetuate the deed on another, okay, which is this other woman that they're holding, stripped, and she's got her baby in her hand, and they're about to rape her too, right? American journalist McGahan, who reported from Bulgaria, wrote the following about this particular incident. Quote, "When a Mohammedan has killed a certain number of infidels, he is sure of paradise, no matter what his sins may be. The ordinary Muslim, meaning Muslim, takes the precept in broader acceptation and counts women and children as well. The Bashi Bazouks, in order to swell the count, ripped open pregnant women and killed the unborn infants." This is an American journalist who was there, who witnessed all this business. Okay, here's another one. This is the abduction of Herzegovinian women by another, made in 1861. From the museum's official description, quote, "Disturbing and extremely evocative, it depicts a white nude Christian woman being abducted from her village by the Ottoman mercenaries who have killed her husband and baby." And you can see her baby's dead right there, and there's her husband. And here are the Muslim Ottoman mercenaries running away with her. All right. And as you can see, there's many more. Okay, here's the slaves being presented to their new masters. I think this is a Russian slave being abducted by a Tatar. More slaves. This reminds me of that quote of, you know, the woman that was saying they were just leering at her. Okay, these are old paintings. There's so many of them. You can check it out. It's on my Substack. All right, many, many, many more. All right. Now, the final aspect, probably the most sordid of all. Okay. This is another one of those aspects that is happening now and has uh, has continuity with the past in the history. And it's this idea that what the Muslims are doing to these European women is all because they want it. Have you heard that phrase? Yeah, she wanted it. Okay. All right. So bear with me now. This is the final portion before we wrap it up. And it's this idea that women, the white women especially, are sexually promiscuous by nature. And in so being promiscuous, it's their fault. They provoke Muslim men into raping and enslaving them. All right. And so this is now actually a lot of this is discussed in another scholarly book. It's called, the title is Byzantium Viewed by the Arabs. Remember, again, Byzantium was the first encounter between the Arabs and European people. So they became sort of the prototype of how Arabs understand white people. So that's why you have all these scholarly works that talk about how Arabs saw the Byzantines. And the title again is Byzantine Viewed by the Arabs by Nadia Maria El Sheikh, an academic. So look what she writes. Quote, "Fitna, an Islamic term, meaning disorder and chaos, refers also to the beautiful femme fatale who makes men lose their self-control. Fitna is a key concept in defining the dangers that women, more particularly their bodies, were capable of provoking in the mental universe of Arab Muslims." She goes on to explain how fair-haired, eyed Byzantine women came to exemplify Islam's femme fatale of fitna. And then Sheikh writes, quote, "In our Muslim texts, Byzantine women are strongly associated with sexual immorality. Our sources show not Byzantine women, but the Muslim writers' images of these women, who served as symbols of the eternal female, constantly a potential threat, particularly due to blatant exaggerations of her sexual promiscuity." And then she gives a lot of quotes from actual Muslim writers and thinkers. Okay, one of them is Abu Uthman al-Jahiz. This fellow was born in 776. This is very, very early in Islam's history. Muhammad dies in 632. This is 776. And he was a prolific court scholar. And he said that the females of Constantinople were, quote, the most shameless women in the whole world. They find sex more enjoyable than, I suppose, other women and are prone to adultery. Fast forward over a century later, Abd al-Jabbar, born in 935, another prominent scholar, claimed that, quote, adultery is commonplace in the cities and markets of Byzantium, so much so that even the nuns from the convents went out to the fortresses to offer themselves to the monks. All right. So from the very start, Muslims, the Arabs, looked at the Europeans, the Christians, the Byzantines, the Eastern Romans, and said all their women are just, they're whores by nature and don't believe in any of the stuff they're doing. They're all just, even the nuns are going out trying to have sex with the monks. Okay. But according to the scholar Sheikh, who analyzes all this and who studied that history, she writes the following, quote, while the one quality that our Muslim sources never deny is the beauty of Byzantine women, the image that they create in describing these women is anything but beautiful. Their depictions are occasionally excessive, virtually caricatures, overwhelmingly negative. Such anecdotes of sexual promiscuity are clearly far from Byzantine reality and must be recognized for what they are: attempts to denigrate and defame a rival culture through their exaggeration of the laxity with which Byzantine culture dealt with its women. In fact, in Byzantium, women were expected to be retiring, shy, modest, and devoted to their families and religious observances. The behavior of most women in Byzantium was a far cry from the depictions that appear in Arabic sources. So what she's saying is, as I gave you those quotes, that Muslims insisted that the white people they encountered, the Byzantines, their women were all whores. But she's saying, no, this was an actual conscious attempt to denigrate and defame a rival culture by exaggerating the sexual laxity, purportedly, of the Byzantines. But in reality, their women were actually very chaste and modest. And I read to you the quote: the behavior of most women in Byzantium was a far cry from the depictions that appear in Arabic sources. All right. Now that's the first encounter. All right. But the Muslims continued doing this with all European women that they encountered subsequent to the Byzantines that I mentioned. All right. And this encountered Frankish women, the Crusaders, the Spaniards, of course, and Slavic women. They were all depicted in the same way. They are by nature hussies who want it. Okay. They're trying to justify, of course, their own proclivities. Now, let me read to you this particular excerpt. Okay, this excerpt goes to great, if not pornographic lengths, all right, about this idea. And it's written by the famous Ahmed al-Din al-Isfahani. This was a celebrated Persian court scholar and poet who followed Saladin around, all right? Now, he has this particular writing. It's in Sword and Scimitar, all right? If you want the source, the exact reference. He explains how he saw a ship containing, quote, 300 lovely Frankish women, full of youth and beauty, arriving by sea. As usual, the flattery ends there, and then the fantasizing begins. So he continues. He says these 300 lovely Frankish women, quote, they all glowed with ardor for carnal intercourse. They were all licentious harlots, proud and scornful, who took and gave, foul-fleshed and sinful, making love and selling themselves for gold, with nasal voices and fleshy thighs, blue-eyed and gray-eyed. They dedicated as a holy offering what they kept between their thighs. They maintained that they could make themselves acceptable to God by no better sacrifice than this. They made themselves targets for men's darts. Okay? Just because he saw European women coming to help the Crusaders, the men, that's how that to him, that's what they were. Okay? Now, this same Ahmed al-Din was present after Saladin conquered Jerusalem from the Crusaders in 1187, which we in the West are supposed to celebrate because justice is done, right? The Muslims finally reclaimed it from those evil crusaders. At least that's what all the movies and books would have you believe. So Ahmed al-Din, who, like I told you, was present for the conquest and entered into Jerusalem. At this point, he was age 62. He launched into yet another sadomasochistic poem extolling the sexual debasement of European women and children, approximately 8,000 of whom, Christian Frankish women and children, were enslaved. So even though you always hear about how magnanimous Saladin was, actually he enslaved a lot of the women and children. And what did he do with them? Well, this is what Ahmed al-Din said he did with them. Quote, this is what he wrote as he watched all these women and crusading women, Frankish women and children being enslaved. He wrote, quote, "How many well-guarded women were profaned? How many queens were ruled, and nubile girls married, and noble women given away, and miserly women forced to yield themselves, and women who had been kept hidden, meaning nuns, stripped of their modesty, and free women occupied, meaning penetrated, and precious ones used for hard work, and pretty things put to the test, and virgins dishonored, and proud women deflowered, and happy ones made to weep. How many noblemen, meaning Muslim lords, took them as concubines? How many ardent men blazed for one of them, and celibates were satisfied by them, and thirsty men sated by them, and turbulent men able to give vent to their passion." All these men, of course, are Muslims. "How many lovely women were the exclusive property of one man? How many great ladies were sold at low prices, and lofty ones abased and humiliated, and those accustomed to thrones dragged and thrown down?" Okay. So as you can see, from of old, Muslims on the one hand desired European women, and on the other hand, always presented them as as promiscuous by nature, wanting it, and all of which, of course, provoked, as you saw, this sort of sadomasochistic treatment of them. Now, does this too carry over into what's been happening? Well, of course, right? We've seen it in the report. But just to make it abundantly clear, let me give you a few more quotes. Now, these are quotes that I had gathered from articles before this report came out, but a lot of them are by the same people, the same girls, the same women. So you will actually find them in the report. Okay, so here's one. This is one of the British girls. She said, quote, "I was passed around like a piece of meat among the Muslim men who abused and raped her between the ages of 12 and 14. And then speaking as an adult at a court, she said how she was, quote, "raped on a dirty mattress above a takeaway and forced to perform oral sex acts in a churchyard," of course, because that's more degrading overall to the woman because they see her as a Christian. And how one of her abusers, quote, "urinated on her in an act of humiliation afterwards." Okay. And then one of the men explained to her why he was raping her. He said, quote, "You white women are good at it," end quote. Another Muslim man called a 13-year-old virgin, British girl, a little white slag, which I had to look up. Apparently, this is British slang, which means basically loose, promiscuous woman, before raping her. In Germany, a group of Muslim migrants stalked a 25-year-old woman. They hurled, quote, "filthy insults at her and taunted her for sex." And then they too explained their logic. They said, quote, "German girls are just there for sex," before reaching into her blouse and groping her and essentially raping her. Another Muslim man who almost killed his 25-year-old German victim while raping her and shouting "Allah," afterwards asked her if she liked it. In Australia, a Muslim cabbie groped and insulted his female passengers, including by saying, quote, "All Australian women are sluts and deserve to be raped." In Austria, an Arabic-looking man, as he's described, approached a 27-year-old woman at a bus stop, pulled down his pants, and all he could say, this is the quote, was "sex, sex, sex," prompting the woman to scream and run away. Okay. So as you can see, all these old motifs I read you from these old Islamic texts that present Europeans, fair-skinned people as promiscuous by nature, it's still alive and well, and how they want it, and this sort of sadistic, desire to humiliate them, which is happening in Britain and elsewhere. As we saw, the Australian gang was uh, engaged in such horrific, humiliating tactics that the judge called it worse than murder. All right. And just to be clear, even though all of this, we're talking about how Muslims treat and see Europeans, past and present, the real, excuse me, common factor in the end is not that they're white, it's that they're infidels, and especially that they're seen as Christians. I told you, you don't have to, you can be a European who's an atheist, but in the Muslim mentality, Christianity is like a cultural thing. It's the people of Europe, it's Western people, it's white people. All right. And so now let me show you now a perfect quote. So I wrote about this many years ago. 3 Christian girls in Pakistan were walking home after a hard day's work. And these are modest girls. These are not partying girls. You know, like I told you, in Pakistan, in Egypt, in these countries, the Christians are minding their own business, and then they get snatched up and raped. And they were accosted by 4 Muslims in a car who started yelling, quote, suggestive and lewd comments, harassing the girls to get in their car and have some fun, they said. When the girls declined this invitation, adding that they were, quote, devout Christians and did not practice sex outside of marriage, the men became enraged and chased the girls, yelling, quote, how dare you run away from us? Christian girls are only meant for one thing, the pleasure of Muslim men. Direct quote. Okay. And then they drove their car into the 3 girls and they killed one and severely injured the other 2. All right. So there it is. Okay. I think that's enough for now. To sum up, actually, let's take your final chats and then we will sum up. Where's my glasses? Pretty sick stuff, huh? I always find it remarkable when you tie up the continuity. This is not new. This is not just something happened due to some strange circumstance. James, hey Raymond, Eastern Orthodox here. Was wondering if we could get a small tour of your prayer corner. Huh. Well, that would require me to like get up and walk around with a camera. Not now. Maybe one day. There's much I should like to share with you people, but we'll get there. Canadian A. Thanks, Raymond. Been following your work for a while now. It seems the general public have begun to wake up to the threat of Islam. Is it possible to coexist in a peaceful way going forward? Coexist in what way? Like live together? Sure. As long as you're the majority and you are firm with the Muslims and you let them know we're not going to play these games. And yeah, there's going to be repercussions, serious repercussions. And we're on to you. We know these doctrines. We know these teachings. You can tell us you don't believe them all you want. But if you step out of line in any way, shape, or form, yeah, there'll be hell to pay. Yeah, then you can live in peace. And in fact, they'll even respect you for that, believe it or not. Thanks, Farlan. Christina, if one were to read the Bible verse by verse, it's actually very metal. LOL. The story of Simeon and Levi killing a whole town for the rape of their sisters come to mind. Exactly. That's what I'm talking about. If you read the whole Bible, I mean, I don't know, does the Old Testament not count for anything among Christians? That wasn't the case before. Those stories actually meant something. They're not exactly, it's almost like we think everything in the Old Testament doesn't count anymore. So then why do we read it? Why do we keep it? Can you prioritize a Christian doctrine or gospel verse that best served the Reconquista? Well, as Mr. Paleo, the originator of the Reconquista, said, the verse he mentioned was the mustard seed. He said, from this little kingdom, he was hiding in a mountain with just a handful of rebels, Christian rebels. He said, from this little mountain, Christ's words of the prophecy of the mustard seed will come to pass, which is you see a tiny thing, but it will grow and become a great thing. And it did. It took 8 centuries of constant bloody warfare with the Muslims to evict them. But that was the logic, We're going to start off, and maybe there is some hope in that verse, including for the Brits, because you're starting very small, but hopefully The small thing will grow. The mustard seed will become a great thing eventually. Lies destroy lives. Voltaire, Rousseau, Russell, and others would not have been so quick to lie about Islam if they lived in North Africa under Islamic rule. I think that would apply to so many people. So many of the people who speak so well about Islam are people who have no experience with Muslims other than, like, someone mentioned it. You go meet one Muslim who, I know the Muslim down the street. He's nice to me. The Muslim at 7-Eleven is nice to me, so Islam must be great. Or Tucker Carlson. Oh, I went to Saudi Arabia, and wow, well, as a Christian, I feel really good here. Yeah, okay. I wonder if that's a stratagem on their part. Could it be, you think, they're treating you because you're influential in a special way that they wouldn't treat a no-name Christian? Yeah, we know the answer to that. Because if you're a no-name Christian and you're just caught in your house praying or worshiping or celebrating Christmas, you go to jail and you get tortured. But for whatever reason, Tucker Carlson is so committed to always speaking well and protecting Islam. Bullshark, what is your recommendation for reading more about Duke Godfrey? My recommendation, I assume you read about him in my book, Defenders of the West, is a look at the bibliography section for his chapter. And you will see a lot of the sources that I consulted, which will have a lot more information that I brought in because I only brought in, the more relevant things. The Redneck. Hey, thanks for joining. Julia Mora. Hello, Ray. Thank you again for another great live stream. And thank you. Thank you all. New Horizon. The West won't understand this religion until awareness and knowledge is spread. Without awareness, all is lost. Appreciate your efforts, brother. I agree. Yep, I completely agree. That's the stage we're in still because we've lost this knowledge. A few hundred years ago, I wouldn't be doing this because everyone would have, in some instinctive way, understood exactly what I'm talking about. But this knowledge has been methodically stripped and taken away from you intentionally, so you can become what you are, sitting ducks. So yeah, we need this knowledge. That's why I'm doing it, and hopefully it can spread and ameliorate these deplorable situations that we find ourselves in. New member Henry. All right, great. All right, all. This will be it. This is the second part. I think this is as comprehensive as they get. And now I will give you the quick summary as usual. And we saw in the first, I'm not going to say the first and second part, but the bottom line is we got this report, which talks about 250,000, at least, it's much more, I'm sure, European, British girls who were groomed, raped, sadistically humiliated, all sorts of things. If you saw the first live stream, they were talking about, how they would break glass in their vagina and shove baseball bats in their anuses, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. And how the authorities did absolutely nothing. That is when they weren't actively helping sometimes, especially in the context of people like Sadiq Khan, who was repeatedly, you can find videos about him questioning about all this, and would always cover up for it because of, loyalty and enmity. He's covering up for his real people, the Muslims. And that's been going on. And now finally, thankfully, we have an actual report crowdfunded because the government wasn't going to do anything about it. And now you see the ugly truth. And well, why is this happening? Is it because of Pakistanis? Well, I don't think so, because we've seen the same things happening in other European countries that don't even have Pakistanis, or if they do, it's very small. And the culprits in this case are Arabs, are Afghans, are sub-Saharan Africans, Nigerians. And what is the common thread to them all? Well, it's Islam. And we looked at the doctrines, and we saw so many different doctrines that, of course, lead to what we're seeing, that it's okay to enslave infidels, that they're not even humans, they're just possessions, that you can have sex with young children based on Muhammad's precedents with Aisha, et cetera, et cetera. And then we looked at the history, and we saw that, of course, slavery was a massive component of the Islamic world. and especially with a premium for white slaves, specifically women, for sex slaves. And at the same time, not only were Muslims raiding Europe, every corner of it, in search of slaves, to the point that it provoked the Viking phenomenon. In the words of that one historian, that's how it came about, because they learned, the Vikings, these other pagans learned that, oh, the Arabs, the Muslims will pay us top dollar to give them these white slaves. And therefore it happened. Okay. And as we saw, yeah, the continuity and similarities are still alive. Other white pagans, namely the left, is still feeding the children of Europeans and Christians, their children, to Muslims in a different uh, manifestation, as we're seeing right now. And at the same time, this desire for white slaves, which you saw the sources, it's not me, Muhammad talking about the people of yellow, etc., and all these different caliphs wanting it. But you also saw that hand in hand with that, even though you had that one Muslim scholar who I quoted, Shbul, who wants you to think like, oh yeah, they just really prize them, which implying they treated them well. No, they actually found them physically attractive, but they also hated them, had contempt for them. It was very sadistic. I read to you those quotes, including the one from Ahmed al-Din during the Crusader or the Islamic conquest of Crusader Jerusalem, and how he was just in glee watching all these Crusader women basically get raped sadistically. All right. And so there it is. There it is. You have the doctrine, you have the continuity, you have the patterns, past and present, and you have what's happening now in Britain. And thankfully, it's become better known, and hopefully, something will be done about it, one way or the other. And with that, my friends, I will bid you adieu. And there's one last chat here. Cray, Torah is littered with examples of Yahweh prohibiting Israel from allowing certain haircuts, foods, idol gods, etc., from entering the land. He knew the corrupting effects. America needs that wisdom. Yeah. Why would anyone allow, and this isn't, I mean, yeah, Torah, but this is called common sense. This is what Muslims do. This is what the Japanese are doing. We have our way. And why would I bring something that contradicts my way? The West claims it has sexual freedom and liberty and women equality, right? And then you bring in a mentality that is the exact opposite of that, which is women are dirt and they're my slave, and they act that way. And then what do? Do you call them out and get rid of them and apologize? No, you double down, bring more, and yell at the people who are calling this out and call them racists. Okay. That's why this needs to be rectified, like I said, one way or the other. And with that, until next time, take care. Goodbye.